Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in November of last year. November 2025 to be exact. Sometimes I wish I had never stepped foot in the Porcupine Mountains wilderness. Other times, I think maybe everything was inevitable the moment I decided to follow through on my plan, that my fate was sealed when I stuffed my gear into the trunk and headed north with my dog, Baxter. But what's done is done, and all I can do now is tell you what happened. I was an IT consultant for 7 years at a mid-sized firm in Detroit. It was stable, good money, and I was engaged to a woman I thought would be my partner for life. Then, in the space of 3 months, that life fell apart. Layoffs wiped out half the office, and my fiancée decided she wanted something else, someone else. I found myself jobless, single, and stuck in a cramped apartment brimming with reminders of a future that was never going to happen. So, on a whim that felt half inspired and half mad, I sold off some electronics, scrounged up enough to buy camping gear, and decided to spend 2 weeks in the Porcupine Mountains. The Porkies, they call them. A swath of old-growth forest and ridges in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I'd always loved the idea of wilderness, but I'd never gone more than a day on a trail. Still, I convinced myself it would be a perfect reset button. I wanted to find solitude to prove I wasn't just a city guy behind a desk. I wanted real silence so my thoughts could roam and maybe heal. Baxter, my 6-year-old German Shepherd mix, had always been my loyal shadow. He'd greet me at the door every day, his tail wagging so hard it rattled the closet doors. The plan was for him to come with me, for us to roam the forest. If nothing else, I'd have a friend by my side. We set off the second week of November, temperatures hovering just above freezing. The roads were quiet the deeper we drove, the dense pines and bare hardwoods swallowing the highway's edges. By the time I reached the remote parking lot near Mirror Lake, it was mid-afternoon. The sun was hidden behind a thick slate of clouds. Crisp air stung my cheeks. I remember feeling a flicker of excitement. For the first time in months, I felt alive. Nervous, but alive. I loaded my backpack, clipped Baxter's leash, and ventured in. My plan was a loop hike, about 30 miles over rugged terrain. I had enough supplies for 10 days. Freeze-dried meals, water purification drops, a small propane stove, and a brand new sleeping bag. The first day passed uneventfully. The trails were damp from recent rains, but everything else was normal. Baxter trotted ahead, sniffing random branches, occasionally glancing back to ensure I was keeping pace. Near dusk, we made camp by a small clearing. The wind whistled through tall spruces, and I caught glimpses of Mirror Lake in the distance. I pitched my tent and set a small ring of stones for a fire. My phone showed no signal, which was expected. I switched it to airplane mode to save battery. I tried starting a fire. The wood was dry enough, but for some reason, the flame just sputtered and died. I tried again, using more tinder, but it only lasted a few minutes. My frustration grew. Baxter let out a small whine, perhaps sensing my annoyance. Finally, I got a small flame going, though it was oddly blue-green at the edges, which I dismissed as chemical residue from the tinder or the damp wood. Still, it gave off heat, and the tension left my shoulders. That night, I drifted off to the sound of Baxter's soft breaths. It was strangely calm. I remember thinking, maybe this will work out after all. I woke before dawn to Baxter growling. In the faint glow of my headlamp, I saw him standing at the tent door, hackles raised. My heart thudded. I froze, listening for footsteps outside. Silence. just the rustle of branches. Cautiously, I unzipped the tent. Nothing was out there, yet Baxter continued to bare his teeth. The campfire was out, but an acrid smell clung to the air, almost like burnt hair. I checked my watch, 5:23 a.m. I unzipped the sleeping bag to get up and realized it was already unzipped. The entire side was open as if I'd crawled out in the middle of the night, except I hadn't. Or, if I did, I had no memory of it. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe I'd done it in my sleep. I called Baxter back in, eventually soothing him. He lay back down, ears perked, watchful. Morning came gray and cold. After a quick bite of a protein bar, we continued deeper into the wilderness. The second day was similarly quiet, though the trails seemed less maintained than I expected. A few times I pulled out my phone to snap photos, but it wouldn't turn on, even though I'd fully charged it. I tried to power it up. Nothing. My phone was effectively a paperweight. By mid-afternoon, I noticed that the trail sign didn't match my map. The wooden marker read Copper Ridge 2 miles, but my map placed Copper Ridge at least 6 miles away. I rubbed my eyes, suspecting I'd made a navigational error, so I just followed the sign. An hour later, I'd somehow looped back to a place I recognized from the morning. I'd done a circle without meaning to. A sense of unease crept in. The day was slipping away, and I felt I was going in circles. Meanwhile, Baxter became agitated. He'd pause, stare into the woods, then growl at nothing. Twice, I heard faint rustling, as though something moved out of sight whenever we approached. But I saw no animals. Not even a bird took flight from a branch. After setting up a second camp, I tried to gather more wood for a fire. The forest was eerily quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, just this heavy hush. I collected enough sticks and logs, but when I tried to light them, the flame again burned strangely, sputtering with an unpleasant chemical stench. Eventually, it died out, refusing to ignite. I gave up, wishing I'd brought an extra can of propane. With no fire, the cold set in quickly. Baxter curled at my feet while I prepared a freeze-dried meal using the stove. The hiss of propane was the only comforting sound in that unnatural silence. After I ate, I crawled into my sleeping bag, the world outside pitch black. The darkness pressed in. I remember feeling as though the trees themselves leaned closer. Night brought dreams. Broken, terrifying dreams. I saw a man with vivid blue eyes standing over me, smiling. He had a neat beard, and he whispered my name in a voice that sounded like gravel and honey. I couldn't move, pinned by a fear so visceral my throat locked up. Then I was awake, panting. Baxter whined at my side. When I reached for my watch, the dial read 2:37 a.m. I lay there, counting heartbeats, waiting for dawn. But dawn never seemed to come. I dozed off again at some point, only to jerk awake repeatedly. It was like time was stuck in an endless loop of night. Finally, morning arrived, though it brought little relief. When I unzipped the tent, an immediate wave of nausea washed over me. Something reeked, rank, metallic, and sweet. I stumbled outside, retching. Baxter ran ahead, barking. About 20 yards from my campsite stood a deer. At first, I thought it was just a carcass. Then I realized it was propped up on its hind legs, gutted from neck to groin. Its eyes were hollow, dried blood matted around the sockets. The entrails were missing, and instead there were what looked like twigs twisted into shapes inside the rib cage. It was an abomination. I gagged, mind reeling. Was this the work of some predator, a sick person? My stomach twisted again as I saw fresh footprints in the soggy earth around the deer. Boot prints, large, and a single set. I whistled for Baxter to return, but he was circling the carcass, hackles raised. Nothing moved in the surrounding woods. The day felt too still. I couldn't stay there. I packed up with trembling hands, harnessed Baxter, and left. My plan was to head toward Mirror Lake again, maybe find a maintained trail. I wanted other campers or a ranger station. I needed people. I walked for hours, but the trail seemed to warp. Rocks I didn't recall stepping over now appeared behind me. At times, the wind would pick up, moaning through the branches, then vanish. Then the same wind sound would return a few steps later, repeating as if on a loop. My watch read 3:15 p.m., but the sun remained hidden behind clouds that never seemed to shift. Baxter pulled me along at times, nose to the ground. It felt like he was following a scent. Eventually, the trees parted and I spotted movement. Relief flared. Someone else was here. Pushing through the brush, I found a narrow clearing with a single occupant. A woman kneeling by her backpack, rummaging for something. She was about my age, wearing a dark green jacket and a knit cap. She looked up quickly, startled, then offered a half smile. "Hey," I said, voice unsteady. "You okay? Sorry, didn't mean to barge in." "It's all right," she said. "Just lost my phone charger or something. Can't get mine to turn on. I'm Danielle Keller." "I'm Nathan." I knelt to pet Baxter, who was sniffing around her pack. "This is Baxter. You're camping alone?" "Yeah, kinda my first big trip." She exhaled. "But things have been weird. My phone's dead, the trails don't line up with my map. I keep feeling like I'm going in circles." My mind whirled. At least I wasn't alone in this. I told her about the gutted deer, about the strange fires. She paled and nodded as if it confirmed her suspicions. We decided to stick together for a bit. Safety in numbers. Baxter seemed to trust her well enough, even if he was on edge from the day's events. Danny and I walked side by side, scanning the map as best we could. The official trail was supposed to lead us southeast, eventually crossing with another well-traveled path near Mirror Lake. But no matter how we walked, the terrain never quite matched. By late afternoon, according to my watch, I felt deep hunger pangs. My legs ached. We found a small patch of relative flatness and decided to camp. Since we both had stoves, we agreed to share the clearing. We set our tents a few feet apart, each of us glad for another human's presence. We tried to start a campfire again, but as soon as it caught, the flames flickered strange greens and blues and then died. Baxter watched it warily. Danny shuddered, saying the color reminded her of will-o'-the-wisps. That night, we talked quietly. She was from Grand Rapids, worked part-time at a marketing firm, and had recently broken up with a manipulative partner. She'd come here to find herself, which sounded suspiciously like my own reason. We laughed about the coincidence, but our conversation would dip into awkward silences whenever we remembered the rotting deer or the creeping sense that the woods themselves were hostile. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and we retreated to our tents. Baxter dozed off at my feet again, but I couldn't sleep. Through the tent wall, I could see faint flickers of bluish light. Could have been my imagination. Could have been moonlight. But it felt artificial somehow. I tried to ignore it, hugging Baxter close, willing my mind to shut down. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of footsteps circling the tent. Soft, deliberate steps. Then a scraping sound, like something sharp dragged along the nylon. In the dream, I saw a figure with glowing eyes grinning. I jolted awake to a rustling sound outside. Baxter was gone. The tent door was half-zipped. My heart hammered. I scrambled out, calling for him. The clearing was dark. Danny's tent was zipped up. I swore under my breath. Baxter never left the tent on his own, especially at night. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured a few yards away. "Baxter!" I hissed. No response. I listened carefully. Somewhere to my left, I heard an odd whimper. I hurried that way, shining my light among the trees. I found footprints in the wet earth, human footprints but bigger than mine, and no dog prints. A wave of dread rolled through me. Then, just as I was about to call out again, Baxter trotted back from the opposite direction. He had no visible injuries, but his posture was rigid, tail low. It was like he was in shock. He looked at me with an almost human-like sorrow in his eyes. I bent to check him. He was cold, fur damp. My flashlight beam revealed something red on his muzzle. Blood, or maybe sap? I couldn't tell. I brought him back to the tent, my mind spinning. I considered waking Danny, but decided to wait until morning. Maybe Baxter had gone chasing something. Maybe the footprints were from some passing camper. I tried to rationalize, but I didn't sleep well, if at all. Morning came, dim and colorless. I stepped out of the tent to find Danny already up. She looked shaken. "Anything weird last night?" she asked. I hesitated. "Baxter wandered off. Scared the hell out of me, but he's back." She frowned. I heard voices. Couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like two men whispering. "I didn't see anyone," I said, though the footprints I'd seen still gnawed at me. "We should keep moving. Try to find an actual ranger station or meet another group." She nodded. "Yeah." We packed quickly. The forest seemed even quieter than before. No bird calls, no rustling squirrels, just dead silence and our footsteps on damp leaves. As we walked, the clouds overhead barely shifted, as though the sky was stuck in a single gray moment. My watch read 9:15 a.m., but the light felt like late afternoon. Twice, we heard splintering branches in the distance, as if a tree was being snapped in half, or something was rampaging through the undergrowth. We never caught sight of anything. By midday, we came across an old, partially collapsed cabin perched near a small stream. Moss covered the roof, and a battered door hung on rusted hinges. Danny suggested we investigate. Maybe we'd find a clue or some leftover supplies. Reluctantly, I agreed, though Baxter refused to go inside. The moment we approached the threshold, he backed off, ears flattened. The interior stank of rot and mildew. Broken furniture lay scattered. I poked around while Danny checked the back room. Suddenly, she let out a startled yelp. I rushed in to find her standing over a pile of bones. Small animal bones, or so I thought. But among them were too many ribs, suspiciously large. My skin crawled. The entire place radiated a sense of wrongness. We got out of there. Baxter barked at us the moment we emerged, as if scolding us for going in at all. Around what should have been dusk, we made camp again. A thick fog rolled in, blanketing everything with ghostly white. My watch said 5:20 p.m., yet it was nearly pitch black. We pitched our tents close, hoping to share any shred of warmth or safety. Once again, a normal campfire proved impossible, so we relied on the propane stoves for light and minimal warmth. We were halfway through eating freeze-dried dinners when a branch snapped loud enough to make us both jump. Baxter growled, facing the darkness. Danny and I switched on flashlights, but all we saw were twisting shadows in the fog. I felt my pulse throbbing in my throat. Then someone spoke, a man's voice, smooth and warm. "Mind if I join you?" A figure stepped into the edge of the lamplight. He wore a neat, dark jacket and black hiking pants. He was in his 40s, maybe older. His piercing blue eyes locked onto me with an unsettling intensity, and a pleasant smile curved his lips. "I'm Luke," he said, nodding politely. "Saw your little campsite. Thought I could share some warmth." His eyes flicked to our stove, then to Baxter. Baxter was trembling, but not barking. It was as if he didn't know whether to cower or attack. There was an immediate sense of alarm welling inside me, but Danny, trying for politeness, said, "Sure, we don't have much of a fire though. The wood isn't cooperating." Luke's smile never wavered. "Wood out here's tricky," he said. "Sometimes the forest just doesn't want you to have a fire." Something about his tone made the hair on my arms stand up. Yet he was calm, friendly. If anything, he projected the air of an experienced outdoorsman who knew all the secrets of the woods. I glanced at Baxter. The dog was whimpering, lips curled but not attacking. We exchanged small talk. Luke claimed he'd been hiking the area for a few days, that it was his hobby to explore off-trail. He nodded sympathetically when we told him about our strange map issues and phone trouble. But every time we tried asking him direct questions, like where he came from or if he'd seen anyone else, he danced around with vague answers. He'd simply grin, flash those intense blue eyes and say, "Out here, we're all travelers, right?" I couldn't ignore how pristine he looked. No mud on his boots, no sweat or grime on his face or clothes. That alone felt impossible given the terrain. Eventually, Luke offered us a tip for making fire. He knelt, took a few sticks from our pile and arranged them in a teepee shape. He struck a match that flared with a bright, almost liquid light. The wood caught instantly, burning with a normal orange flame. My stomach twisted in confusion. Why wouldn't it work for us? Danny seemed impressed, but I was just unnerved. Something about him felt off, like a mask over a monster. Baxter never relaxed, eyes locked on him. When the fire was stable, Luke stood and nodded as if satisfied. Then he said, "It's getting late. I'll camp nearby. Maybe we'll catch up tomorrow." He smiled at us, too long, too wide, then added, "Stay safe out here. The forest can be tricky." With that, he vanished into the fog as silently as he'd arrived. We were both rattled. Danny muttered that maybe he was with the Park Service, though she didn't sound convinced. I wondered if he was some kind of local weirdo or a skilled hiker. Still, we had a fire at last, so we stayed awake a bit longer, letting its warmth calm our nerves. At some point, we turned in. I kept my knife within reach in the sleeping bag. Baxter lay pressed against me, heart beating fast. I woke with a jolt, certain I'd heard a woman screaming. My watch read 3:58 a.m. The fire was out, and the temperature felt subarctic. I called for Danny, but she didn't respond. I rushed out of the tent, fumbling for a flashlight. Danny's tent door was wide open. She was gone. "Danny?" I shouted into the fog. Silence. Baxter paced around, whining. I tried following footprints, but the ground was a mush of damp leaves. Nothing. I scanned the area, shining my flashlight like a madman, hoping to see her or Luke or anything. Eventually, I found a single sign of a struggle. The corner of Danny's jacket snagged on a branch, torn with fresh blood. I felt sick. Adrenaline spiked in me, flooding my veins with panic. "Danny!" I yelled again. No reply. Only that suffocating silence. I spent the next hour circling the camp, calling her name. Baxter tried to sniff for her, but he kept whimpering and doubling back, as if terrified to wander too far. Finally, exhausted, I slumped against a tree, my breath hitching in the cold. Danny was gone. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she'd gone to relieve herself, got lost, fell. Maybe she'd had an accident. But I couldn't ignore the possibility that Luke took her, or that something worse lurked in these woods. At dawn, if you could call the faint light that I forced down a protein bar and made a decision, I'd look for her, systematically. I packed both tents, stuffed her things into a spare bag, then tried to follow any sign I could find. Hours passed in a daze. My watch read 10 a.m., 12 p.m., but the sun never broke the clouds. As I trudged along, my mind replayed every sinister detail. The deer carcass, the footprints, Luke's immaculate appearance, the smell of burning hair. Over and over it circled back to the possibility that Danny was hurt or worse. Eventually, I found her. She stepped out from behind a stand of dead furs, her jacket torn, hair disheveled. Relief and dread slammed into me simultaneously. She looked off. Her eyes were wide, pupils huge. She had this stretched, unnatural smile. "Nathan," she said, voice flat. "I was gathering wood. I must have wandered too far." I stared at her. Gathering wood at 4 a.m? The question formed on my lips but never came out. Her entire demeanor was wrong. She stared without blinking, mouth curved in a near grimace. Baxter growled, a low rumble that never wavered. She didn't even flinch. "Danny," I said carefully, "you had me worried. Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "I'm fine, just disoriented." Her gaze slid sideways, and I noticed a smear of dried blood along her forearm. She made no attempt to hide it. I tried to approach her, but Baxter lunged, barking like crazy. She turned that unnerving smile on him, baring her teeth. It was a primal expression, more like a snarl than a smile. "He sees too much," she murmured, then snapped her head back to me. "It's cold out here. Let's build a fire." Something in her voice curdled my insides. I forced myself to speak evenly. "We should find help. There must be a ranger station. You might be in shock. Let's go together." She stared for a moment, then gave a quick shrug. "Sure," she said, her tone disturbingly casual. As we walked, I stayed behind her on edge. Baxter kept giving her sideways glances, as if expecting her to lunge. Sometimes she'd pause, tilt her head as if listening to voices, then continue. She asked me questions that we'd discussed the previous day, like, "Where are you from?" or "What's your dog's name?" The repetition made my skin crawl. It was as if she'd forgotten everything, or was pretending to forget. Eventually, we decided to rest. I couldn't think of it as a mutual decision because she just stopped walking, gazing at me until I agreed we'd sit. Baxter circled us, whimpering. I tried to build a small fire, but it fizzled again, burning only with that weird greenish flame before snuffing out. A shiver of fear told me it might be her presence affecting it. Or maybe I was losing my mind. She sat eerily still, that plastic smile stuck on her face. When I glanced at my watch, I realized time was moving strangely again. I'd last checked it maybe 30 minutes ago, yet now it showed the same time. 12:24 p.m. My stomach churned with anxiety. "Danny," I ventured, forcing a gentle tone, "what happened last night?" She cocked her head. "I told you, I got lost." I pressed on. "You were screaming. I heard you." Her eyelids fluttered rapidly for a second. Then she resumed that blank stare. "You must have dreamed it," she said, voice monotone. "I haven't screamed." Without warning, she shot up and walked toward Baxter. Alarm flashed in me. Baxter barked, then bared his teeth, backing away. But she moved faster, grabbing him by the collar. I sprang to my feet, yelling for her to stop. She twisted a small, rusted blade from somewhere in her jacket and, with a swift motion, slashed Baxter's neck. It was so sudden, so brutally efficient, that I stood there, paralyzed. Baxter let out a choked yelp, blood spurting. I tackled Danny, roaring in panic and rage. We fell to the ground, rolling over damp leaves. The knife scraped my forearm. Her face was still frozen in that grotesque smile. I wrested the blade from her hand and pinned her arms. She didn't fight back in a normal sense. She just kept staring at me with that expression, as though she barely felt any of it. I scrambled up, rushing to Baxter. He lay trembling, blood staining his fur. Gasping, I tore off my jacket sleeve and pressed it to the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. My mind reeled. Baxter was everything to me. My friend, my anchor. The cut was deep. I could feel the warmth of his blood on my hands, and I started to sob, tears blurring my vision. Danny stood unmoving. She watched with a mild curiosity. Then, with a small tilt of her head, she said, "He sees too much," in that same toneless voice. Her apathy, her mania, whatever it was, broke something in me. I roared at her to get away. She simply turned and started walking off, deeper into the woods. I focused on Baxter. I tried to stabilize him, using the few medical supplies I had. The cut was severe, but maybe not instantly fatal. He bled heavily, though it slowed under the pressure bandage I managed to rig around his neck. He whimpered, licking my hand. My heart hammered with fear that he'd die out here. I promised him we'd get out no matter what it took. I needed to find help, but now I also had to watch my back. Danny, or what was left of her, was out there, possibly waiting. And then there was Luke. The bigger prints around the deer carcass lingered in my memory. Why had he shown up at our camp so casually? Baxter could barely walk. I improvised a sling with part of my tent and rope, carrying him across my shoulders to keep pressure off his neck. Every step was agony. My arms and back screamed with pain. The forest around us seemed to shift, paths dissolving. At times, I'd pass the same mossy log I'd passed half an hour ago. I tried to ignore the sense that we were rats in a maze. Occasionally, I heard footsteps behind me, too heavy to be Danny's. I caught glimpses of movement, maybe a figure in black. My breath would quicken, and I'd try to pick up the pace, but carrying Baxter made that nearly impossible. Then, around what my watch claimed was 3 p.m., the sky dimmed rapidly, as though night was falling hours early. Wind whipped up from nowhere, rustling branches in a frenzied dance. I heard distant laughter, faint but distinct. I stopped, pressing my back against a tree, scanning the gloom. A voice drifted through the swirling leaves, one I recognized instantly. "Luke?" "Nathan," he called, "you look tired. Let me help you?" A flash of movement, and he was there, standing not 5 feet away. No rustle of leaves or cracking twigs announced his arrival. His smile was all bright teeth. His clothes were still pristine. I tightened my grip on Baxter, heart pounding. "Get away from us," I hissed. Luke lifted his hands in a calming gesture. "I mean no harm. I just want to make a deal. You can walk out of here, safe and sound. Just leave behind the dead weight. You don't need to carry him." Rage erupted in me. "He's not dead weight," I snarled. "He's my dog." Luke's expression didn't change. "You're losing your chance to escape," he said. "This forest is, let's call it a domain that can be shaped." He stepped closer, gesturing to the swirling fog and darkening sky. "Time doesn't mean what it used to here, and neither does life and death. It's quite an opportunity if you know what to sacrifice." "Who are you?" I whispered. "What are you?" He chuckled. "A traveler, like you." I swallowed, mind spinning. "What did you do to Danny?" "She invited me in," he said softly. "She was so desperate for acceptance. It was almost pathetic." He shook his head. "You, though, you're stubborn. Resisting. That's what makes you interesting." I remembered the gutted deer, the footprints, the weird fires. He was behind all of it, or at least he was orchestrating it. I began, but the word devil lodged in my throat. Or maybe demon, something foul. He extended a hand. "Let the dog go. Give me a token of your loyalty and I'll walk you out. You'll forget every horror you've seen here. You'll go home free of heartbreak, free of everything." I stared at him, an instant wave of temptation rising. If I just let Baxter die, I could get my life back. The rational side of me screamed that I couldn't trust this creature. The other side recalled the excruciating weight on my shoulders, the hopelessness. My arms ached from carrying my wounded dog. I shook my head, tears forming. No. A small flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "All right then," he murmured, "but every refusal has a price." In the next instant, I felt a searing pain in my left forearm, as if something was branding my skin. I cried out, staggering. Baxter whimpered in pain from the jolt. When I looked down, the flesh on my arm was blistered and red. A faint shape, like a claw mark or a letter, was burned there. Luke smiled, that perfect, hollow smile. "You'll come around," he said, and in the blink of an eye the wind swelled, scattering leaves. When they settled, he was gone. Fighting off pain and panic, I forced myself onward. Baxter was drifting in and out of consciousness, occasionally licking my cheek. I mumbled reassurances to him, ignoring the burn on my arm. The swirl of time confusion intensified. Sometimes I'd take 3 steps and find the sun had dropped lower. Other times, the gray gloom would brighten for a moment, as though midday had returned. My watch was stuck at 3:16 p.m. All at once, I stumbled onto a random campsite, a rusted sign reading Group Site #4, half buried in leaves. It looked somewhat maintained, with a metal fire ring. Maybe a mile beyond, I could see a silhouette of what might be a ranger cabin. My exhausted relief was tempered by suspicion, but I had no choice. I trudged forward. As I neared the structure, I realized it was battered, paint peeling. A large sign read Ranger Station closed for season. Even so, the door was slightly ajar. I kicked it open carefully, bracing for anything. Inside, there was a musty front room with a wooden desk, a few chairs, a dusty radio, a back room with a cot. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. I laid Baxter on the cot, rummaged the place for medical supplies. I found a dusty first aid box with gauze and antiseptics, plus some old canned goods. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. There was a row of battered lockers. One was locked, but I pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, I found a small handgun, a .38 special revolver. It had 3 bullets left in a box. My hands shook. I pocketed it, feeling a trickle of hope or at least a sense of some control. Outside, the sky was almost black, even though I couldn't begin to guess the real time. I gathered what I could to barricade the door. Then I tended to Baxter's wound as best I could, praying the contamination wouldn't kill him. He was conscious but weak, breathing shallow. I must have dozed off next to him because the next thing I recall is hearing footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart pounded. I reached for the revolver. The door creaked, but held under my makeshift barricade. Then a voice, "Nathan, it's me. Danny." I closed my eyes, terror coursing through me. She's not really Danny, I told myself. I forced myself to be silent. She tried the knob again, then knocked lightly. "You in there?" she asked, voice calm. "I'm sorry about Baxter." I was confused. "Let me in. I'm so cold. Please." I said nothing. She kept talking in that gentle, plaintive tone, describing how sorry she was, how she needed help, how she was just disoriented. But occasionally, her voice slipped. She'd hiss a word or cackle softly, then correct herself and continue the plea. It was horrifying, like 2 voices trying to speak through one mouth. At one point, she said, "We can get out of here if you let me in. Luke told me how." That rattled me, but I remained frozen, gun in hand. Baxter stirred, letting out a weak growl. Eventually, the footsteps retreated. I exhaled, realizing how close I'd come to losing my nerve. The night crawled on. I heard faint whispers outside, wind swirling, laughter. Something battered the walls. The radio static flared at random intervals, once or twice bursting with a crackling voice I couldn't quite make out. Just after one surge of static, I heard a man's amused voice say, "Are you ready to bargain yet?" Then it all went silent again. Near morning, judging by the slight gray in the window, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. This place was no refuge. If I stayed, I'd be cornered. Baxter needed real medical attention. I had to act. So, with renewed resolve, I packed the revolver, loaded him onto my improvised sling, and forced the door open. Fog lay thick over the campsite. Broken branches littered the ground as if a storm had blown through. I saw no sign of Danny or Luke. I pressed on, guided by a faint memory of the map. There should be a dirt access road a mile or so south of the station that eventually leads to the main highway. Time jerked around us. Sometimes it felt like we marched for hours. Other times, it felt like minutes. I glimpsed a figure in the corner of my eye, male, tall. I'd whirl around, gun raised, but find nothing. The trees loomed over me, dripping with what looked like black sap. The path opened to a small ravine, a rocky slope sliding down. I recognized something. A row of stunted fir trees that signaled a known boundary. Maybe we were close to the road. I scrambled down carefully, Baxter moaning from the jostling. My foot slipped on a patch of wet rock. I went down hard, jarring Baxter's body. He yelped. My left arm banged a sharp edge, reopening the burn. Pain jolted me. As I tried to stand, I heard footsteps above. Luke appeared, as if stepping through a veil. He gazed down at me, pity in his eyes. "You look terrible, Nathan," he said. "You'll never make it out in time. Just say the word and I'll deliver you from all of this. Hand over the dog, or better yet, hand over yourself. So much of you is already mine." I used the ravine wall to stand, ignoring the throbbing in my legs. My eyes flicked to the revolver in my belt. I half lifted it, but Luke smirked. "You think that'll work?" I fired. The bullet cracked the air, hitting him square in the chest. He staggered, letting out a sharp bark of pain, but instead of blood, something black and thick seeped out, swirling like smoke. My heart soared briefly. Maybe it did work. Then he laughed, dark and low. He took a step and I shot again, this time hitting him in the shoulder. The swirl increased, but he kept moving. "Stubborn," he hissed, eyes flashing. "I'll leave you a final option then. You can save your dog, but you'll stay, or you can leave and let him die here. Choose." Rage and grief welled up. I had one bullet left. I forced a step forward, bracing for recoil. "I choose neither," I growled, and fired at his face. The bullet smashed into his jaw, sending more of that swirling black tar spraying. He let out a shriek that rattled the air. The ground beneath us trembled. I seized the moment. Luke was flailing, his head half-wreathed in smoky darkness. I scooped up Baxter and stumbled away, half running, half limping through the ravine's lower path. Behind me, Luke's screams became something else, like a chorus of voices layered into one. The trees bent inward. My surroundings flickered between night and day. Leaves rained from above, shriveling midair. I kept going, ignoring the pain, ignoring the impossibility. At last, I spotted a rough dirt track, an overgrown road. I followed it, adrenaline fueling my battered body. The screams receded, replaced by a dull hum in my ears. Baxter was barely conscious but alive. The road continued for what felt like an eternity. My watch was stuck at 4:16 p.m. now, no matter how far I walked. Then I saw a parked vehicle, a dusty Jeep behind a locked gate. My heart soared. It was real, solid. I bypassed the gate, followed a sign for the main highway. Soon, I emerged onto cracked asphalt. The sudden sense of normalcy nearly toppled me. I walked, flailing my free arm to flag down any passing car. Minutes later, a battered pickup slowed. A middle-aged man in a hunter's cap leaned out. "Holy, you all right?" I barely had the breath to respond. "My dog's hurt, need help." He helped me and Baxter into the truck. For a moment, all I felt was relief, so profound it was almost painful. I recall seeing the man look at my forearm and blanch at the burn mark that spelled something like an inverted L shape. I had no explanation for him. We drove. The trees began to look normal. The clouds broke enough to reveal a late afternoon sun. Baxter's shallow breathing was constant but mercifully consistent. The man said his name was Hank, that he'd been hunting a few miles north. I tried to explain what happened, though my story must have sounded insane. He nodded, but didn't question it. Maybe he saw something in my eyes that said I wasn't lying. He pulled into a small clinic in the nearest town, where they treated Baxter. I was in shock, babbling about the Porcupine Mountains. The vet told me Baxter's wound missed a major artery by a fraction of an inch. I remember nearly collapsing with relief. By the time I realized I should mention Danny or call the authorities, I was already lying on a stretcher, an EMT shining a light in my eyes. Days later, I tried explaining to the state police. I gave them descriptions of Danny, of Luke, of the locations, but they found no trace of any campsite or cabins with bodies or bones. They asked if it was possible I'd hallucinated from exposure or a head injury. I didn't know what to say. I kept the burn mark on my arm hidden with bandages. It never quite healed, scarring into something shaped like a claw. Baxter recovered, though it took weeks of care and rest. Since then, we've never returned to the Porcupines. I doubt I ever will. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. A month after I got home, I spotted a man at a coffee shop in Detroit. Late 40s, neat beard, bright blue eyes. He saw me and smiled. Too long, too wide. Then he was gone in the crowd. I stumbled after him, but it was as if he vanished into thin air. Part of me fears he's always watching, waiting for the right moment to collect what he believes is owed. So, if you ever go into the Porcupine Mountains, or any wilderness for that matter, watch out for the ones who offer easy solutions to impossible problems. Sometimes, the forest doesn't want to let you go. Sometimes, it wants everything you have. And sometimes it has a caretaker with eyes like bright knives and a voice dripping false kindness. I still dream about that ravine. The bullet tearing through Luke's jaw, black tar swirling around him. The way time warped and the forest screamed like a living thing. I don't know if I truly escaped or if I'm just walking a longer path to the same end. All I know is that I have Baxter, my scar, and the memory of that horrifying grin. And if that's the best I can manage, I'll take it. Even now, if I linger in a dark room with my eyes shut, I can hear Luke's voice, gentle and persuasive. You'll come around. They always do. I pray that I never do, but something in the back of my mind whispers that the bargain was made long ago, that I left a piece of myself in those woods. Maybe one day he'll come to collect. Oh, one. My name is Matthew Carter. I'm 29 years old, and this happened in September 2023. It's taken me months to come to terms with it, and some nights I still wake up covered in cold sweat, convinced I can hear the same chilling whistle from the trees outside my bedroom window. My therapist says writing it all down might help me process the trauma, but I suspect nothing will help. Still, I'll do my best to piece together those lost days, the strange passage of time, and the horrifying things I witnessed in the Nordhaus Dunes wilderness. I'm no outdoors expert. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and most of my time is spent hunched over a desk in my small apartment in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Earlier that year, my fiancé and I had broken off our engagement. My client work was piling up, but I wasn't actually making much progress. My world felt too small, suffocating. I needed an escape. The plan was simple: get outside, breathe fresh air, and reconnect with nature. Maybe I'd come back inspired. Originally, I'd planned to go alone with my dog, Scout. Scout is a chocolate Labrador with boundless energy, the kind of dog that'll chase a ball for hours without tiring. She's been my closest companion through all the chaos of the breakup. But at the last minute, my cousin Aaron Peters asked if he could tag along. He was a couple years older than me, 32, and worked as a nurse in a busy ER in Detroit. He was stressed out too, always complaining about double shifts in high-pressure environments. A quiet bro trip, as he called it, seemed perfect for both of us. There was an odd note in his voice when he brought up Nordhaus Dunes. He'd said he remembered going there as a kid with his parents. It's beautiful, right on Lake Michigan, but it's a lot less crowded than Sleeping Bear or anywhere else, he told me. I'd chosen Nordhaus because I wanted solitude, so his recollection of it being empty of tourists sold me. He insisted we push further inland beyond the usual campsites, near a cluster of pine stands. No one ever goes that far, he said. We set off in early September. The weather forecast promised cool temperatures and clear skies, a perfect setting for a 5-day trip. My gear was modest: 2 tents, a small propane stove, some freeze-dried meals, water filters, a good sleeping bag, and a phone loaded with trail maps. Aaron brought his own bag of gear, including extra tarps, flashlights, and a collapsible shovel. He teased me that I looked like I'd just stepped out of an REI catalog. New boots, new backpack, no real idea what I was doing. Still, I felt confident enough. How hard could a wilderness trip be? We parked the car at a trailhead. There were no other vehicles around, which felt like a good sign we'd have the forest to ourselves. The first day was pleasant. We hiked a few miles in, through stands of tall, swaying pines that hissed in the breeze. The dune ridges rose in gentle slopes, covered in grasses and occasional oak trees. It was beautiful. After a few hours, we found a good spot to make camp. A small clearing with a fire ring made from stones. Though the ring looked old and rarely used, it was perfect for us. Aaron was unusually quiet that evening. He poked at the small fire we'd made, then stared into the flames as though lost in thought. Scout, for her part, seemed uneasy too. She kept pacing around the perimeter of our clearing, sniffing and whining. I assumed she was just adjusting to the new smells. We cooked freeze-dried chili, unrolled our sleeping bags, and turned in early. That night, the wind carried a soft whistle. Not a person whistling a tune, more like the sound of air being pushed through a gap in a door or through a hollow bone. It rose and fell in the darkness, faint and drifting. I convinced myself it was just the wind in the pines, or maybe the lake breeze. But somewhere in the back of my mind, an uneasy feeling took root. Day 2 started off normal enough. We ate breakfast, then packed up our gear to move deeper into the dunes. The plan was to find a more remote campsite, near a small creek we'd seen on the map. When I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, the screen was dead. At first, I assumed I'd forgotten to charge it overnight, so I shrugged and put it away. Aaron tried his phone. His was dead too. We'd charged them fully that morning before leaving the car. It made no sense that both died simultaneously. We pressed on without the GPS, following a well-trodden path. Another hour passed, and we realized we must have taken a wrong turn. The dunes around us became steeper, the vegetation thicker. Eventually, we decided to head north, using the sun's position as a guide. Around midday, we stumbled upon a shape carved into a pine tree. It was a spiral, dug into the bark, about the size of my hand. Something about the precise swirling pattern gave me a chill. Aaron studied it for a moment, then turned away. He didn't say a word about it, and I didn't press him. By mid-afternoon, we found the creek. It was as picturesque as I'd hoped, clear water running over smooth stones with trees shading the banks. We set up camp and filtered some water. Scout played in the shallows, chasing little fish. She seemed happy there, and I felt a bit more at ease. Maybe the phone thing was just a coincidence, or a weird battery glitch. That evening, while we gathered firewood, Aaron pointed out a cluster of trees with claw-like scratch marks in a spiral pattern, matching the carving we'd found earlier. "Could be a bobcat or something," he said, but the marks were arranged so deliberately it almost looked like a design. I felt another prickle of unease. We lit our fire. Then the strangest thing happened. The flames flickered green for a moment, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. Aaron stood there with an armful of wood, eyebrows raised. "What the hell was that?" he asked. I had no explanation. I waved it off. Maybe some chemical in the wood. We continued to feed the flames. They went back to normal color, but every once in a while, just at the edge of my vision, the firelight would flare in that green hue again. That night, Scout refused to settle. She kept pacing the perimeter of our tents. Aaron was in an odd mood, too. One minute talkative about old times, the next minute silent and brooding. "I remember these woods," he said at one point. "Came here when I was a kid, but I got lost for a night. Mom swore she heard me calling for help, but I never made a sound." He cast a glance to the trees. "You never forget the feeling of being followed," he added, but refused to say more. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, I noticed how quiet the forest was. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just a low hush. That whistling from the previous night started up again, a breathy note weaving through the branches. I felt exposed in that tent. Eventually, I drifted off, lulled by exhaustion, my mind swirling with images of those spiral carvings. When I woke, bright sunlight streamed through the tent's nylon walls. The first thing I noticed was that my sleeping bag was partly unzipped from the inside, as though I'd gotten up in the middle of the night, but I hadn't, at least not that I remembered. My watch said 7 a.m., but the sun seemed too high for that. Maybe my watch was off, or maybe I'd overslept. I shrugged it off, zipped the bag again, and stepped outside. Scout was gone. My heart dropped into my stomach. The area around my tent was empty, no sign of her. Aaron stood by the ashes of the fire pit, wearing a concerned frown. "She was here at dawn," he said. "I saw her sniffing around the creek, but then I dozed off. We called for her, whistling, scanning the undergrowth, but she didn't come. An hour passed, then 2. Fear ate at me. She'd never wandered off this far before, especially not in unfamiliar territory. Panic set in. Aaron and I split up to search, each shouting her name. The forest had changed somehow. The air felt heavier, and the pines seemed to close in around us. Every now and then I'd hear what might have been a bark, but when I ran toward it, I found nothing. Worse, I found more spiral carvings, on tree trunks, on rocks near the creek. A sense of dread crawled up my spine. The shapes looked old, yet somehow fresh. After 3 hours, I returned to camp, exhausted and frightened out of my mind. Aaron was already there, looking pale and sweaty. "No sign of her," he whispered, eyes flicking around like he was worried something might be listening. Not a footprint, not a sound. We decided to break camp and keep searching while moving deeper, hoping maybe we'd find her chasing deer or something. I stuffed my gear into my backpack, or I tried to. My pack felt strangely light. When I opened it, the inside was damp, and half our supplies were covered in what looked like a layer of black mold. The freeze-dried meal packages had rotted from the inside, the plastic pouches brittle and crumbling. Even the spare clothes were damp and foul-smelling, as if they'd been submerged in water for days. Yet the outside of the pack was dry as a bone. Aaron had a similar experience with his bag. Some items were fine, others destroyed or missing. Phones, of course, were still dead. Our small solar charger refused to work. We had just enough food left to last a couple of days if we rationed carefully. The weirdness was piling up, and so was our desperation. Late afternoon turned into a disorienting journey. We wandered the trails, calling for Scout, trying to find something familiar. The dunes all looked the same after a while. Pines and sand ridges, pine needles crunching underfoot. Then, as we rounded a bend, we saw my backpack hanging high in a tree about 20 feet up. The pack I was wearing was obviously not the one in the tree, but it was identical. Even the red carabiner I used to hang my water bottle dangled from the side. It made my skin crawl. My own pack was on my back, but there it was again in the tree, or a perfect copy of it. The tree trunk had more spiral scars, circling up like a twisted staircase leading to that dangling pack. Aaron swore under his breath, rummaging through his bag to see if any of his items were missing or replaced. Everything was still there, but he pulled out one of our notebooks. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles that neither of us remembered writing. Symbols, twisted lines, and repeated phrases in block letters. Who's behind you, who's behind you, who's behind you? My blood went cold. We pressed on, leaving that nightmarish sight behind us. The light was fading quickly, but we had no wish to camp near that tree. Eventually, we stumbled on a small clearing near another water source, a stagnant pond that smelled faintly of sulfur. We were too drained to keep going. As Aaron set up the tents, I tried to start a fire, but the matches kept going out. My lighter wouldn't spark no matter how many times I flicked it. Eventually, by using Aaron's metal striker and a wad of dry leaves, we got a weak flame going. It sputtered, threatened to die, then finally took. Immediately, that same greenish glow sparked in the flames, so bright that it lit the clearing in a sickly hue. Aaron cursed and backed away. I tried to keep calm, but inside, terror was building. The forest pressed in from all sides. It was as if the wind had died completely. The only movement came from the flicker of our unnatural fire and the shifting shadows of the tall pines. We ate a few leftover crackers and peanut butter, then sat in silence. Hours seemed to pass, though my watch claimed it was still only 7 p.m. "Time's not working right," Aaron whispered. His eyes were wide, unblinking. "This place, it's wrong. I swear I saw the sun go down too fast like a slideshow skipping slides." I stared into the flames, watching them turn from green to orange and back again. I wanted to say something reassuring, but the words died in my throat. Around what should have been midnight, we heard something approach the clearing. Soft paws on pine needles, a low whine. Scout emerged from the darkness, limping slightly. Relief crashed over me. I bolted to her side. She wagged her tail, but it was slow and heavy, as if exhausted. I hugged her, and tears of relief stung my eyes. She looked all right, no visible wounds, just a bit dirty. Aaron watched this reunion with an odd expression, as if uncertain. Scout settled by the fire, resting her head on my lap. Even though she seemed calm, I noticed her blinking was off. She would stare at the fire for a long time without blinking, then suddenly snap her gaze to me. Her eyes looked a shade darker, too. I chalked it up to exhaustion or a trick of the firelight. I wanted so badly to believe everything would be okay now. I must have dozed off. When I woke, I realized I was alone by the fire, which had burned low. Aaron's tent was zipped shut. Scout was gone again. The clearing was quiet, except for a faint whistle. Terror spiked in my chest. I listened for a moment, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to circle the edges of the clearing, weaving in and out of the trees. My hair stood on end. I don't remember falling asleep again, but the next thing I knew, I was waking to dim, gray morning light. The fire was completely out, just cold embers. Aaron's tent was unzipped, empty. I crawled out of mine, calling his name, then saw footprints in the soft dirt heading away from camp. Scout trotted into the clearing a few minutes later, her tail wagging. She was carrying a half-eaten squirrel in her mouth, which wasn't like her at all. She was usually more of a gentle dog, never known to kill anything unless absolutely cornered. I scolded her, but she stared at me with a blank intensity. I had to take the squirrel away, burying it nearby, feeling more uneasy than ever. Something had changed in her. Aaron returned about an hour later, dragging a pile of branches. His expression was hollow, and he had a forced grin plastered on his face. "Found some wood," he said, voice sounding flat. He kept blinking one eye before the other, like a delayed reflex. "Should keep a fire going." I asked him why he was gone so long, and he just shrugged. "Only been a few minutes," he insisted. I glanced at my watch. 2 hours had passed. Either my watch was wrong, or he had lost all sense of time, or both. We packed up again, deciding we should head back to the car. The plan was to follow the creek until we hit the main trail. We'd cut our trip short. We were out of supplies, out of phone batteries, and nearly out of hope. But the creek wasn't where we'd left it. It was as if the entire landscape had shifted during the night. We wandered in circles for hours under a sky that alternated between normal daylight and a bizarre twilight hush. Suddenly, it was evening. I don't know how else to describe it. The sun was high one moment, then gone the next. My stomach growled with hunger, my limbs ached, and the forest felt impossibly large. We were both dehydrated, so we stopped to drink from a puddle after filtering it. I kept hearing a distant whistle, the same pattern, repeated over and over. At times, it sounded like someone calling my name, but stretched out and distorted. It was near that puddle I found the deer carcass, or what was left of it. The torso looked partially eaten, ribcage exposed, meat stripped away. But the deer's head had eyes that were unmistakably human. They stared up at me, wide and bloodshot, as if in silent accusation. I yelped, stumbling back, gagging. Aaron came over, looked, and didn't even flinch. He murmured, "Not even hungry," then turned away. That was when I knew something was seriously wrong with him. A normal reaction, even from a medical professional, would have been at least some revulsion. But he wore that eerie grin, blinking too infrequently. We left the deer, whatever it was, behind us, and continued walking until we found a cluster of pines thick enough to hide us. The sense of being followed was overwhelming. I thought maybe we could hide for a while and see if anything passed us. Aaron started rummaging in his bag. "Matt," he said, voice too calm, "you got anything to cut with?" I just stared at him. "What do you mean?" He looked up, grin twisting. "I think Scout's not feeling well. Could dissect her, see if she's got an infection." At the words sank in slowly. "What the hell, Aaron?" I shouted. "That's insane." He blinked, his grin flickering. Then he looked away, as if offended. "Right," he mumbled. "Never mind." I moved my hand protectively toward Scout's collar, and she pressed against my leg. She seemed to sense the hostility. For a moment, I thought Aaron was going to lunge at us, but he just turned and walked deeper into the pines, mumbling to himself. I decided then and there that I needed to keep an eye on him. Whatever was happening, it was getting worse. We hadn't eaten a proper meal in what felt like days. Sleep was patchy at best. The ground seemed to shift whenever we tried to rest. I had no idea what day it actually was anymore, but it had to be at least day 4 or 5. We made a feeble camp that evening, no fire. Aaron slumped against a tree, arms wrapped around his knees, staring into the dark. Scout lay near me, occasionally letting out a soft whine. I was on the verge of tears, fear and despair battling in my gut. If I just had a working phone, or a compass that didn't spin, maybe we could find our way out. But everything in this place seemed to be unraveling, including our senses. That night, I dreamed. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I saw Aaron standing over me with a knife, eyes glassy. He leaned down, bringing his face close. He whispered, "It's better this way," and pressed the blade to my throat. Then I heard that whistle again. The whistler was right beside my ear, but it didn't sound like a whistle anymore. It sounded like breathing, copying my own ragged gasps. I jolted awake, scrambling away, expecting to find Aaron with a knife. But he was gone. Scout was also gone. Instead, I found a spiral of footprints circling around my sleeping spot. They were bare footprints, bigger than my own. Toes splayed in a weird shape. The prints led away from the clearing, disappearing into the pine needles. Panic surged. I grabbed my smaller flashlight, the only one still working, and called for Aaron and Scout. I wasn't even sure which one I wanted to find first. Every step in that darkness felt heavier, like I was trudging through swamp mud. The trees stood silent, branches twisting into shapes that reminded me of bony fingers. My flashlight flickered, threatened to die. Then I heard a rustle of movement behind me. I whipped around. Aaron stood there, wearing a twisted smile that stretched too wide. "Matt," he said, voice soft, almost comforting. "I found something." He held out his hand. A chunk of fur, brown fur. Scout's fur. My stomach dropped. "I think she got hurt." "Where is she?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shrugged. "Close. She'll come back." Then he turned and walked away without a word, deeper into the darkness. I followed, but after a few steps, he was gone. As if he'd vanished into thin air. That was impossible. I shouted his name until my throat burned. By the time dawn broke, if dawn was even real anymore, I was half delirious, stumbling through the trees, searching. Finally, I returned to our makeshift camp. Aaron was there, lying on his side, eyes open, facing away from me. He didn't move as I approached. When I gently turned him over, I nearly dropped the flashlight in horror. The skin of his face was missing. Just the front portion of it, from forehead to chin, as if cut away with surgical precision. Dark blood stained the pine needles around him, and he lay as still as a mannequin. I vomited, my hands trembled, and I almost ran, but I forced myself to kneel to check for a pulse. Unbelievably, I felt a faint, fluttering heartbeat. "Aaron?" I croaked. His eyes, there were no lids, shifted to look at me, watery and full of agony. He parted his lips, but no sound came out. I fumbled in my bag for something, anything, to help. Useless. I had no medical supplies that could fix this. I was sure he was dying, but he was still somehow holding on. As I stared at that gaping wound, I realized something else. The edges of the peeled skin were ragged, as though gnawed. My mind flashed to a story I'd heard about a creature that mimics voices, devours faces. I'd always dismissed such legends, but now I was face to face with the impossible. Tears flooded my eyes. This was my cousin, my friend. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned around, expecting the worst, and found Aaron standing there, face intact, wearing a horrible grin. Except I knew the real Aaron lay dying at my feet. This thing was wearing his face like a mask. My breath caught in my throat. The creature let out a low, mocking whistle, exactly the sound we'd heard each night. "We should bury that," it said in Aaron's voice, nodding toward the body. I stumbled backward, almost falling over. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the sight of Aaron's remains with this perfect copy. His eyes, however, were a fraction too wide, his posture slightly hunched, his legs angled at an odd angle like an animal on its hind limbs. "You're not him," I whispered. It cocked its head. "I am now," it replied, the grin twitching. "He fed me." My mouth went dry. The stories, the childhood tales of shapeshifters, skinwalkers, wendigos, they all collided in my head. Some malevolent spirit or creature had singled us out. "Where is Scout?" I demanded, though I could barely choke out the words. It gave a mock frown. "Scout, she's gone. I took what I needed." Something in me snapped. Rage overrode terror. I scrambled for the hunting knife strapped to my belt. I lunged. I wasn't thinking straight, just blind emotion. The creature pivoted with unnatural speed, but I managed to slash its leg. Dark fluid oozed from the wound. It let out a shriek, a warbling cry that reminded me of an animal in agony, but with layers of distorted human voices underneath. The whistle roared in my ears like 1,000 flutes screaming at once. My head felt like it was splitting open. The ground wavered. The creature, still wearing Aaron's face, limped backward, hissing. "You shouldn't have done that," it snarled, voice overlaying my cousin's. "We could have walked out together." From the corner of my eye, I saw something move near the tree line. Scout. She stepped into view. At least it looked like her, except her tail was rigid, her eyes locked on me with no sign of recognition. She let out a soft whimper. Her fur was patchy, and there was a dark stain around her mouth. This time, the betrayal was too much. I realized she too had been taken by whatever this thing was, or something related to it. I backed up, tears in my eyes. The double of Aaron growled and limped toward me, black blood dripping from its wound. "This face is so fresh," it crooned in a voice that was half laughter, half pain. "I can taste his memories. Tastes like fear." I swallowed thickly, glancing back at the real Aaron's remains. His eyes stared sightlessly at the sky. Whatever shred of mercy remained in me told me he was gone. Nothing left. I had to survive. I faked a lunge to the left, then darted right. The creature swiped at me with a hand that ended in elongated nails. It grazed my arm, drawing blood, but I kept moving. My only thought was, get out, get away. If I stayed, it would kill me or worse. I sprinted deeper into the forest, zigzagging among the pines, hearing it crash after me. Something was wrong with time again. I'd run for what felt like 15 minutes, but the sun overhead flickered between dusk and dawn. My watch was spinning uselessly. I ran until I tripped, falling face first into the sand at the base of a tall dune. Pain shot through my knee. I rolled over, adrenaline surging. No sign of the creature. The forest was silent except for my ragged breathing. A wave of nausea hit me. I knew I needed to keep moving, but my body was near its limit. I had no idea how many days or hours had passed. When I finally stood, I forced myself forward. I stumbled over dune ridges, through stands of trees, ignoring the burning in my legs. The whistling started again, occasionally replaced by the sound of Scout's bark or Aaron calling my name. At one point, I heard my own voice echoing from behind me. Each time, I forced myself not to turn around. I must have blacked out from exhaustion because the next thing I remember is lying on the sand, blinking in bright sunlight. Ahead of me was Lake Michigan's vast expanse of shimmering water. I'd reached the shoreline. Relief flooded through me and I let out a sob. It felt surreal, like I'd never see civilization again. Yet here was the lake, the dunes that formed the edge of Nordhaus. If I followed the coast south, I might reach a designated campground or a parking area. I made myself get up and limp down the shoreline, shoes squelching in wet sand. The waves lapped calmly, and the open sky felt like freedom compared to the suffocating pines. But the sense of dread never left me. I scanned the dunes behind me, fully expecting to see that twisted shape wearing Aaron's face. After walking for what felt like an hour, I spotted something up ahead, another person, a park ranger by the look of their uniform, standing near a small outcropping of boulders. My heart soared. I waved my arms, calling for help. The ranger turned around, shading their eyes. "You all right there?" they called back. Tears welled in my eyes as I stumbled over. "Please, my cousin. Something happened. We got lost, and..." I trailed off, not sure how to explain the horrors. The ranger's face was solemn. Okay, they said, guiding me gently by the arm. "We'll sort it out. You look half dead, friend." They led me over to the boulders where a second ranger stood. I didn't recognize them, but they nodded politely. The first ranger offered me water, which I gulped down greedily. Relief flickered through me, like maybe I was saved. They asked a flurry of questions, but I was shaking so badly I barely made sense. "It's in the woods," I managed. "It looks like my cousin, but it's not him." The rangers exchanged a look. "Sounds like you had a rough time," the second ranger said. Their voice was oddly soothing. They glanced at their colleague. "We should get you to a hospital, maybe?" I nodded, trembling. "Yes, please." They told me to wait while they grabbed their radio from the truck. I collapsed against one of the boulders, trying not to burst into hysterical sobs. I was safe. Finally, I was safe. But then I noticed something. The second ranger was staring at me, not blinking. A memory surged. Aaron's slow blinks. I swallowed, forcing a smile. The ranger smiled back, too wide, too long, exposing slightly too many teeth. The first ranger came back from behind the boulders. Their face was blurred in the bright sunlight, or maybe I was delirious. They had something in their hand, a leash, a dog leash made of braided hair. My heart hammered. "We found your dog," they said, voice taking on that same echoing quality as the whistler. "And your cousin, too." The second ranger nodded in unison, grin not faltering. Ice-cold dread sank in. My body wouldn't move, fear holding me in place. The second ranger's face began to ripple. I think I screamed, or tried to. The first ranger's eyes shifted, pupils dilating until the irises were swallowed in black. I don't remember much else clearly. There was the sense of slipping. Like the sand under me vanished and I fell through darkness. A whistle in my ears, my voice calling to myself, the memory of Scout's wagging tail, Aaron's grin, a slash of pain in my side, then blackness. When I woke, I was in a hospital room in Ludington. That's what they told me anyway. My leg was bandaged, my arms scratched up, and I was severely dehydrated. According to the nurse, a couple of day hikers had found me unconscious near the shoreline, babbling about whistles and spirals. No one mentioned rangers or anything else. They never found Aaron's body or Scout. They never found any sign of a struggle or gore. The official story is that I got lost, had a breakdown, and hallucinated. The nurse said the day hikers found me alone, delirious. A detective visited me once, asked me a few questions about my cousin's whereabouts. I told the story as best I could, but it sounded insane. No one believed me, and eventually they dropped the search, citing a lack of evidence. They assumed Aaron might have left the area. The case remains open but inactive. It's been months I'm back in Grand Rapids, working half-heartedly. Some nights I hear Scouts bark outside my door, or see Aaron's reflection in the mirror. On more than one occasion, I've woken with my bed covers unzipped from the inside, or my phone battery drained to zero, even though it was charging. Last week, I found a spiral drawn in condensation on my bathroom mirror. I tried wiping it off, but each time I turn off the light, I swear it reappears. I dream every night of the dunes, the pine trees, and the low whistling that echoes over the ridges. I see the creature wearing Aaron's face, the blackness behind its eyes. Sometimes it calls my name. Sometimes it begs me to come closer. And sometimes I do, as if I can't resist. Even as I write this, I'm glancing at the window. I can't shake the feeling something's out there, waiting. It knows my voice, and it can walk around wearing the faces of those I love. My name is Matthew Carter. I'm 29 years old. This all happened in September 2023. If you're reading this and you hear a whistle in the pines, don't follow it. Don't linger. Because if you do, if it takes you, I don't think you'll ever truly leave those woods behind. Maybe you'll be walking around out here, but the you that mattered will remain there forever, trapped in the dune shadows, lost and whistling in the dark. My name is Caleb Morris. I'm 34 years old, and what I'm about to describe happened in October of 2022. I've tried to write it all down before, but the words never quite feel right. Maybe putting it on paper will help me believe that it really happened, that the events that unfolded in the Huron Mountains near Skaney, Michigan, weren't just a nightmare I can't wake up from. I make a living as a freelance wildlife photographer. I'm not a veteran or any sort of hardcore survival expert. I just enjoy camping, observing wildlife, and occasionally selling a handful of good photos to magazines. When my old college roommate, Joel Thatcher, found out I was planning a trip to the Huron Mountains in search of moose and owls, he practically begged me to let him tag along. Joel was never big on nature back in our university days. He'd been the loud, charismatic party guy, but he insisted he'd grown to love the outdoors. He said he'd bring his girlfriend, Clara, who wanted a weekend getaway from the city. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I agreed, thinking it might be nice to have someone else along for a change. We set off around the second week of October. The leaves were in full color, and the crisp morning air promised the perfect backdrop for photography. I had my gear, and I had Ruckus, my 5-year-old German Shepherd, who never went anywhere without me. Ruckus is a big loyal beast of a dog, protective, sharp-eyed, and usually calm. He'd been with me on dozens of camping trips without incident. The first day was normal, if you call hiking into a remote wilderness area normal. Joel was full of jokes and braggadocio, talking about this spot he claimed to know deep in the forest. He told me and Clara we'd get the best campfire vibes ever. She rolled her eyes a lot, but she also teased him back. I got the sense she was less excited about this trip than he was. Maybe Joel had been egging her on for weeks to show how rugged he could be. "Just you wait," Joel said, as we trod over crunchy fallen leaves, backpacks clanking with gear. "This place is so remote, it's not even on the standard park map. I used to date someone who had a family cabin nearby, got the location from her." "Wow," Clara remarked, tugging at the straps on her pack. "I'm so glad your ex taught you wilderness secrets you can brag about." Joel either missed the sarcasm or just didn't care. We headed deeper into the woods. The terrain was fairly challenging in spots: steep, rocky inclines, downed trees forcing detours, and narrow game trails that vanished after a few hundred feet. But we were in high spirits. Even Ruckus seemed excited, tail wagging as he sniffed every rock and log. We reached our planned campsite around late afternoon. It was a small clearing near a creek. The water shimmered with orange and red reflections from the canopy above. We set up our tents, collected firewood, and prepared for a quiet evening around the campfire. The temperature was dropping fast, though, so I got to work on the fire while Joel and Clara pitched their tent. We made dinner, instant noodles and jerky with some camp stove coffee. By the time we finished, we had just enough daylight left for me to scout a bit with my camera. I told Joel and Clara I'd be back in half an hour, and Ruckus trotted at my side. I snapped a few shots of the tree line, the creek, and a lone crow perched eerily on the half-buried log. Typical scenic stuff, but the angle of the late sun made everything glow with a supernatural brilliance. At twilight, we regrouped by the fire, which crackled and spat like any normal campfire. Nothing seemed out of place, just the distant hoot of an owl and the comforting hiss of warm flames. Then night settled in. That was when things started to get uncomfortable. I remember Joel chatting about some frat story from college, and Clara not paying much attention. I was stroking Ruckus's ears, lost in my thoughts, when he suddenly stood up stiff. His hackles rose, and he started growling low. It was a deep, rolling growl I'd never heard from him before. "Ruckus," I said softly, my heart pounding. "Easy, buddy, what's wrong?" He stared beyond the fire's glow into the pitch-black forest. For a second, I thought I heard a faint scratching sound in the distance, but it could have been anything. A raccoon, or maybe just a tree branch shifting in the breeze. Clara asked, "You guys hear that? A whisper?" She turned to us, confusion plain on her face. "I swear it sounded like someone talking." Joel scoffed. "We're in the middle of nowhere. Could be the wind." "Yeah, or animals," I muttered, though Ruckus's reaction was spooking me. He wasn't the type of dog who spooked easily. We tried to settle down for the night, but it wasn't easy. Joel bragged that he could drink whiskey by the fire without any fear of a hangover. He took a few swigs from a flask before climbing into the tent with Clara. I stayed up longer with Ruckus, staring at the glowing embers, occasionally feeling that creeping sensation that someone was watching me. I finally banked the fire and ducked into my tent. Ruckus curled up beside me. Sometime around midnight, I swore I heard a woman's voice whisper my name, Caleb, in the breeze. My heart hammered. I looked at Ruckus. His ears twitched. He didn't growl again, but he stared at the tent wall. I listened hard for a while, but the voice didn't come back. Eventually, I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. When morning came, I woke later than usual. I unzipped my tent, letting in the crisp dawn air. The sun was out, but everything felt off. For one, our small campfire ring was full of fresh ash, as if we'd let it burn unchecked all night, but I'd banked that fire well. And then there was Clara's sleeping bag. It lay just outside their tent, fully unzipped. But it was unzipped from the inside, as if someone had climbed out of it. That was impossible. She'd gone to sleep in the tent with Joel. Clara stumbled out, rubbing her eyes. "Where's my sleeping bag?" she mumbled, squinting in the sunlight. I pointed silently. She gaped at the bag, confusion etched across her face. "Did Joel do this?" she asked. Joel stuck his head out, hair disheveled. "Huh? Do what?" When we questioned him, he only shrugged and insisted he had no idea how her sleeping bag got outside. Clara looked disturbed, almost angry, but with a tinge of fear as she examined it. There were pine needles and damp leaves stuck to the fabric, and Ruckus sniffed it, giving a single anxious bark. We decided not to dwell on it too long. Weird accidents happen. Maybe she'd kicked it out in her sleep, we rationalized, though that explanation barely made sense. The day's plan was to pack up and hike deeper. Joel was certain we'd find a perfect vantage point for wildlife photography near a small lake a couple of miles further. The forest was thick with maple, birch, and the occasional pine. Ruckus still seemed on edge, pausing often and scanning the trees. About an hour in, Joel pulled out his phone to check GPS. He frowned. "Man, my phone battery was at 90% last night. Now it's dead." Clara sighed, pulled out hers. "I'm completely drained too. Must not have turned on the power bank properly." She rummaged in her bag, then frowned. "Where's my charger?" I tried my phone. It was dead as well. Even worse, my backup battery pack showed no juice. That was unusual. But I had a small compass and a paper map I trusted more than digital anyway. However, when I tried to match the trail to the lines on the map, something felt off. The creek that should have been parallel to us according to the map was nowhere to be found. Oh, landmarks seemed absent, or else bizarrely twisted. It was as if the forest refused to line up with the cartographer's version of reality. As we continued on, we came across an old, rusted metal sign nailed to a pine. It was bent and almost illegible. Only one word could be made out, spray-painted in dripping letters: "Witch." Clara let out a forced laugh. "Some bored teenage vandal, right?" Joel shrugged, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. By mid-afternoon, we found a mossy clearing that Joel declared the place. It was definitely scenic, looming birch trees, a partial view of a ravine below. But something about it set my teeth on edge. Ruckus started whining in a way I'd never heard. I almost suggested we press on, but Joel was excited about setting up camp, and I was tired of trekking in circles. Maybe I was the only one who felt the atmosphere of dread creeping in. We dropped our packs and realized just how far from civilization we were. No cell service, no sign of other people. The canopy was so thick it dimmed the afternoon sunlight, creating a twilight gloom. We set up tents again, mindful of the time. We wanted to collect enough firewood before night fell. Joel volunteered to go, insisting he remembered seeing lots of deadfall up a ridge. He set off with a hatchet, leaving Clara and me to inflate sleeping pads, gather more water, and rearrange gear. Ruckus kept pacing, circling the clearing. He'd glance at me, glance at the forest, then whine again. I wanted to distract him, so I led him around the perimeter. While circling, I noticed something etched into the bark of a birch. At first, I thought it was just a random swirl of patterns in the trunk, but the longer I stared, the more it looked like a shape, maybe an eye or a mouth. It had an uncanny resemblance to a face screaming. I tried to brush the thought aside. After about an hour, the sky had shifted from golden to the ominous purple of imminent dusk, and Joel still hadn't returned. Clara muttered curses under her breath, pacing like Ruckus was. "He was just going for wood," she complained. "Why's he taking so long?" I started to feel uneasy. "Let's give him another 15, then we go look." She nodded and turned to rummage in her tent. I heard her exclaim softly. When I looked over, she held up a small jar of honey that had burst open, the contents somehow rancid, dark greenish, seeping. She wrinkled her nose and tossed it aside in disgust. I glanced at my watch to see how much longer we should wait. My watch read 12:09 a.m. That made no sense. It had to be around 6 p.m., give or take. I tapped the glass face, thinking it might be broken, but the second hand was ticking backward in short bursts. I felt that numb, hollow sensation in my gut, like reality itself was loosening around me. I called out Joel's name into the trees, my voice echoing across the quiet forest. I heard nothing except the breeze and the creaking of branches. Then, as if on cue, Joel came lumbering down the slope. At first, I was relieved, until he stepped into the clearing. His face looked different. He was smiling too broadly, his eyes unfocused and distant, like he'd wandered in from a dream. "Joel," Clara said, stepping forward, "are you all right?" He gave a little chuckle. "Never better," he replied. a strange lilt in his voice. Gotta love the fresh air out here. Feels like I haven't been in the woods in years. The way he spoke rubbed me the wrong way. You were a Boy Scout, remember? I said, trying to jog some normal banter. We went on that weekend trip in senior year of college. College, he repeated, rolling the word on his tongue. Then he shrugged. Sounds like a fun time. Clara frowned. Joel, what are you talking about? You and Caleb roomed together at Michigan State. You don't remember that? He blinked rapidly. Oh, yeah, sorry. Guess I got turned around collecting wood. He offered us a small stack of twigs and branches as if it were precious bounty, but it was nowhere near the amount of firewood we needed. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the falling temperature. Ruckus let out a sharp bark at Joel and bared his teeth. Joel didn't react, just kept that odd grin plastered on his face. Clara glanced between me and Joel, clearly shaken. I decided it was probably just fatigue, dehydration, maybe a mild concussion if he'd slipped on the rocks. We decided to start a fire and cook dinner, let Joel rest. That night, the fire was stubborn. Took 3 tries to ignite, and the flames kept guttering out like they were being smothered by an unseen wind. But eventually it caught, though the firelight flickered greenish around the edges. Even the smoke smelled wrong, as though someone had thrown wet leaves and rotten mushrooms onto the flames. I tried to keep the conversation going, partly for my own sanity. I asked Joel if he'd seen any interesting vantage points for photos. He gazed at me, blank-faced for a second, then said, Yeah, I saw a moose. It was talking to me. Clara burst into a harsh laugh. What? But Joel didn't elaborate. He just smiled and stared into the flames. Eventually, Clara turned to me. Let's try to stay up tonight, she whispered, in case he needs help or something. I nodded, though I was exhausted. Within an hour, Joel insisted he was cold and needed to lie down. He crawled into the tent. Clara lingered near the fire with me. We found ourselves speaking in hushed tones, sharing concerns. She confided she'd been on the verge of breaking up with Joel back home. He's been strange for months, she admitted, like a man with secrets. This trip is his big gesture, I guess. But now, I don't know what's happening. Around midnight, Ruckus started pacing, whining louder. I checked my watch again, 12:09 a.m. Still, it wouldn't change. Clara asked me, What time is it? I hesitated. My watch is stuck. Let's just say it's late. We decided we should at least try to rest in shifts. I told her I'd stay awake for a while, then wake her. She seemed relieved, so she settled in her tent. Ruckus and I sat by the fire, which once again was showing signs of dying out prematurely. The moment I added more wood, the flames would sputter and smoke. My own eyelids grew heavy, but I tried to fight it. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke with a start to Ruckus barking like crazy. The fire was nearly gone. Only faint embers remained. My phone's screen was black. I stumbled to my feet and realized Joel's tent flap was open. Clara's was zipped shut from the outside. I unzipped it quickly, finding Clara inside, but no sign that she had done this from within. She looked up at me, eyes wide. What's going on? We saw a shape moving at the edge of the clearing. Someone was standing there wearing Joel's jacket. The shape turned and it felt like my heart seized. It was Joel, but his head was bent at a strange angle, and I swear his eyes caught a glint of starlight in a way that looked like an animal's reflective gaze. He stood motionless for a full minute. Then he turned and walked into the dark woods without a word. Clara scrambled to follow, but I grabbed her arm. Hold on. If there's something wrong with him, we can't just rush in blind. We can't let him wander off, she protested, pulling free. I hesitated, torn between my fear and the need to find Joel. Ultimately, I grabbed my flashlight, motioned for Ruckus to come along, and Clara and I ventured into the darkness. The forest was unnaturally still. Our footsteps sounded deafening on the leaf litter. The flashlight beam cut through the trees, occasionally catching glimpses of something moving far ahead. We followed at least a quarter of a mile, the terrain growing rougher, until we found Joel's jacket hanging from a low branch, drenched in some dark, sap-like substance. There was no sign of him. We called his name repeatedly, receiving only the echo of our own voices. Then, from behind a cluster of pines, he stepped out, stripped to his t-shirt, chest spattered with that same blackish sap. He gave us that too-wide grin. Clara rushed up to him. "Joel, what the hell is going on?" He stared right through her. Then he blinked rapidly a few times as if something had come loose in his head. "Why are we out here?" he asked in a small voice, sounding confused and lost. "Clara, where's your brother? Didn't we come here with him?" Clara gaped. "My brother? I'm an only child, Joel." "It's cold," he said, ignoring her words. "We need to feed the fire or it won't stay lit. It'll blow back if we don't feed it." I stepped forward, trying to calm him. "Hey, let's just go back to the tents, all right?" He nodded, like a child obeying an adult. As we walked him back, he mumbled disjointed phrases about a moose talking, about voices in the wind, about something in the bark. Clara was trembling, her face a mask of terror. Ruckus looked unsettled but stayed close. We reached the camp again, and I guided Joel into his tent, where he collapsed onto his sleeping bag, still wearing that weird expression. Clara and I looked at each other. Neither of us had an explanation for his behavior. Exhaustion took over, and with a final check to confirm Joel wasn't about to wander off again, we both dozed in our respective tents. In the morning, I woke to find my entire pack smelling rancid, as if something had died inside. When I opened it, a wave of nausea hit me. Every single piece of sealed food had rotted overnight, and my water supply had turned an alarming greenish color. The map in my side pocket was damp, the ink running, making the lines look like they were shifting under my gaze. My camera lens was scratched, though I had kept it carefully wrapped in cloth. None of it made sense. Clara and Joel stumbled out, looking as haggard as I felt. Clara tried to make coffee, but the moment she lit the small camp stove, the flame guttered out like it was starved of oxygen. Then the stove simply refused to ignite no matter what we tried. We were forced to eat the last remnants of anything that wasn't spoiled, which basically amounted to half a protein bar and some stale trail mix. Ruckus barked at the tree line again, but we saw nothing this time. Joel mumbled something under his breath, sounded like, "They're hungry too." When I asked him what he meant, he just scratched his head and walked away. He insisted he could find more wood for a fire, so he trekked off again, ignoring Clara's worried protests. She looked at me with real fear in her eyes. "I don't want him out there alone," she said, "but it's probably safer he's gone for a bit, right? Caleb, you're sure you've never seen him behave like this before?" I admitted that in college, Joel had been reckless, but never vacant. Something was very, very wrong. Time dragged. The sun was still up, but I couldn't be certain if it was morning or afternoon. My watch was worthless, still pointing to 12:09 a.m. I was sure we'd only hiked deeper in for a day and a half. Yet it felt like we'd been lost here for a week. The forest shading made it impossible to estimate time by the sun. Even the position of the light seemed variable. When Joel returned, he seemed calmer, more himself, but his pants were soaked. He offered no explanation, and we didn't ask. We decided we had to try to find a way back out, but the roads we came in on? My memory was oddly fuzzy. We'd followed a stream at one point, except the stream had vanished. Clara pointed out that the topography on the map seemed reversed. We spent the day stumbling around the forest, desperately seeking any sign of the trail we'd come in on. We found an outcropping of boulders that neither of us remembered passing, though we must have. My compass needle spun erratically. I'd hold it in my palm, watch it flick to north, then jump south, then west. Joel kept looking around like he was waiting for something to appear. Finally, we gave up trying to navigate and returned to our clearing, even though we were certain that was the last place we wanted to be. As night came once more, the temperature dropped fast. We needed a fire, so we piled together what little wood we had. I set some twigs ablaze with my lighter, but once again the flames burned this bizarre green, as though it were alight with copper or chemicals. The smoke stank of mold. Clara was rummaging in her tent when she began cursing frantically. I ran over, Ruckus at my heel, and found her kneeling over Joel's sleeping bag. He was nowhere to be seen. In her hand was a piece of cloth covered in black sap. It looked like the same substance we'd seen on his jacket. Clara told me she'd discovered footprints in the back of the tent, footprints that led out the other side, as if someone or something had dragged him out in the middle of the day when we were all out. But we'd just been hiking together, hadn't we? My head spun. We had no idea when or how Joel had disappeared again. Clara started shouting his name in desperation. I tried to calm her, but she was beyond reasoning. She grabbed a flashlight and bolted into the woods, ignoring my warnings. I had no choice but to go after her with Ruckus. We wandered among towering pines, calling Joel's name, our voices echoing. At one point, we came across a small clearing with an enormous birch tree in the center. The trunk was massive and gnarled. Ruckus growled at it. I shone the flashlight on the bark, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it looked like birch bark shaped into the face of something far beyond human. Dark holes where eyes might be. A gaping black slit of a mouth. The lines of the bark undulated in the flashlight's beam. Clara abruptly shrieked. I turned the light on her and saw Joel standing behind her. She'd almost stumbled right into him, except now Joel was covered in wet leaves, and something was wrong with his skin. It looked as if his pores were exuding a thin coating of mud or sap. His eyes reflected the flashlight beam again with that inhuman gleam. "Joel!" Clara cried, reaching for him. "Talk to me, please." He grabbed her wrist, and for a moment, I thought he was going to snap it. Then he just let go. "It's so cold," he whispered, though his tone carried a strange echo. I fed her. She wants more. One of us. "What did you feed her?" Clara demanded, voice trembling. He only stared. Then, lightning fast, he lashed out at me with something. Clara's small hunting knife, I realized. I jumped back, but the blade sliced into my shoulder. I felt a hot surge of pain. Ruckus barked and lunged, teeth sinking into Joel's leg. Joel let out an unearthly shriek. He twisted, yanking the knife down at Ruckus. In that instant, I tackled Joel, adrenaline surging. The knife scraped across my collarbone as we crashed to the ground. The impact knocked the flashlight flying, plunging us into near-total darkness. I felt Joel's breath on my face, cold and reeking of decaying leaves. My shoulder burned, blood soaking my shirt. Clara was screaming, scuffling for the flashlight. Then a savage snarl erupted from Ruckus, and Joel was dragged from under me. A scuffling and thrashing followed, Joel shrieking at a pitch I'd never heard a man reach. The next second, an unnatural hush fell. Clara found the flashlight, and in its beam we saw Joel being hauled by Ruckus deeper into the forest. Joel's body was thrashing, but that savage grin still clung to his face. Then Ruckus yelped, and it all went silent. Terrified, I scrambled to stand, ignoring the agony in my shoulder. "Joel?" Clara's voice quivered. "Joel!" She called his name, but there was no response. We followed a faint trail of churned leaves, spots of blood, and blackish sap glistening on the forest floor. The trail ended abruptly at a tree whose trunk had split open like a great mouth. Beyond it, everything was still. We shouted. We searched with the flashlight until the batteries flickered, threatening to die. No sign of Joel or Ruckus. My dog was gone, as if he'd been swallowed up by the darkness itself. Eventually, Clara and I, half in shock, found our way back to camp. I nearly collapsed from blood loss. Clara helped me wrap my shoulder with bandages from my first aid kit. We tried building another fire, but everything we touched seemed to resist flames. The few times we got the fire going, it flickered out with that rancid smell or flared green, spitting sparks at us. We huddled together against a fallen log, trembling. I was losing the fight to keep my eyes open. Despite the fear, exhaustion won. I fell into a fitful doze. I can't say how long I slept. When I opened my eyes, it was dawn. Clara was gone. I called her name, ignored the spike of pain in my shoulder, and forced myself upright. The entire camp looked as though it had been trashed. My tent was torn open, our supplies scattered and rotting. The leftover rope we had was coiled around a tree trunk as if it had grown there. My backpack zippers had turned into curling strips of bark. I found footprints leading away towards the same direction Joel had vanished. I followed them, stumbling with dizziness. My wound throbbed, but I pressed on. The footprints snaked through ferns and between looming birch trees. Sometimes I glimpsed what might have been blood, other times just black sap or muddy water. Eventually, I saw something that made my stomach lurch. A large form suspended in the air, about 8 feet up, as if pinned to a tree. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then I recognized Clara's hiking boot, dangling in midair. I aimed my phone's feeble flashlight mode. It still wouldn't turn on normally, but I coaxed a flicker from it and realized Clara's body was hanging upside down, lashed to a thick branch. Blood dripped from a hideous cut across her midsection. Her torso was peeled open, the skin separated, and beneath it wasn't normal human anatomy. It looked like a nest of roots and bark, as if her insides had fused with the forest. I gagged, nearly dropping to my knees, tears burning my eyes. Her face was contorted in an expression of horror. I climbed up on a fallen log to try and free her, but the second I touched her, a chunk of flesh, root, came away. I slid down the log, retching. A faint rustling sound made me whirl around. Something moved behind me. I glimpsed a figure with long, slender limbs and birch-like skin stepping behind a trunk. My blood went cold. Ruckus? Joel? Neither. The shape was too tall, too twisted. I took off running, ignoring the pain. I didn't know what I was even chasing or fleeing at that point. I only knew I needed to get away from Clara's mutilated body. It felt like hours or days passed as I pushed through brush, my mind teetering on the edge of madness. I lost track of time entirely. 12:09 a.m. was burned into my consciousness. At some point, I stumbled into what looked like the same clearing again, my battered, rotting tents on the ground. I almost howled in frustration. Desperate, I tried to bank a small fire again, rummaging for a lighter. I found it near the ashes. A hint of flame flickered. I grabbed a thick branch and thrust it into the meager fire, letting it catch. As I did, a hush fell over the forest, like the very air was holding its breath. Then I saw her. It, came shuffling from between the birch trunks. The birch witch, I call her. She had no eyes, only empty, leaking sockets. Her skin peeled in strips of pale bark, and she reeked of wet decay. She whispered my name in my mother's voice over and over. Caleb, Caleb. A rasping monotone. My stomach twisted. Fear flooded me, hot as my blood. She advanced slowly, a haunting figure with elongated fingers, the nails cracked and dripping black sap. She raised one spindly arm as if beckoning me forward. I don't know why, but all I felt was a towering rage. I was done being hunted, done losing my friends. I thrust the burning branch at her. The flame took on that sickly green tint, reflecting off her bark-like skin. She hissed with a sound that rattled my teeth. She tried to pull away, but I slammed the branch into her chest. Rotten wood splintered under my blow. A flood of insects poured from the wound, writhing and buzzing. I barely kept from dropping the flaming stick. She screeched again, in a voice that was half human, half howling wind. At that moment, I realized her body wasn't flesh, but layers of bark, fungus, and possibly the remains of her victims interwoven. I saw a glimpse of a half-decayed face near her shoulder, as though consumed and incorporated by her. It might have been Joel, or Clara, or maybe the countless others she'd taken. Summoning every bit of strength, I drove the burning branch deeper, feeling something crack. Smoke poured from her hollow torso. She swung at me with an unnatural speed, raking my forearm. I screamed as her nails tore skin and muscle. The pain was staggering. Ruckus wasn't there to save me this time. I thought I was done for. But the flames must have done something truly damaging, because the next instant she pulled back, letting out a moan like a dying animal. The insects inside her spilled out. A dark swarm that scuttled and skittered around my boots. Her entire form began to fracture, pieces of bark snapping away. I seized the chance to scramble backwards, never letting go of my flaming weapon. I watched, panting and bleeding, as the birch witch collapsed in on herself, dissolving into piles of decayed wood and shrieking insects. Then, everything went silent. No wind, no birds, not even the sound of my own ragged breathing. The next thing I knew, I fell to my knees, exhaustion and blood loss overwhelming me. I must have blacked out. When I came to, sunlight was filtering through the canopy at a steep angle. Judging by that, I guessed it was late afternoon, or maybe morning. Impossible to know. My watch still read 12:09 a.m., the second hand ticking backward. I had to get out of those woods if I wanted to survive. I found a makeshift sling for my torn arm, pressing a bandage to stanch the bleeding from my shoulder. Leaning against a half-rotten log, I forced myself upright and began to move one step at a time. I headed in what felt like the direction of the road. Everything looked the same. Endless birch trunks, all pale with black lines, all seeming to watch me. I walked for what felt like hours. Then, improbably, I saw it. A battered dirt road. Collapsing onto it in relief, I gulped in air. Something about the real dirt under my feet steadied my mind. Eventually, I heard the distant hum of a motor, saw a battered pickup truck approach. The driver was a local older man who stared at me in utter shock when he saw my condition. He helped me into the passenger seat, demanded to know what happened. I stammered something about friends in the woods, missing, attacked. He was wide-eyed, but offered to drive me to the nearest hospital. I asked him if I could use his phone to call the police. He handed it over. No signal. Of course. "We'll get you help," he said, stepping on the gas. He dropped me off in the small emergency department of a rural clinic. The staff rushed me in, hooking me up to IVs, stitching my wounds. A nurse asked me about a dog bite, noticing the marks on my leg, but I told her I didn't know. Everything was jumbled in my head. Police were called. I recounted a garbled version of the events. I told them about Clara Ross, about Joel Thatcher, gave them descriptions, insisted they were still out there. The officers looked at each other with puzzlement. They said no one by those names had been registered in the local parks or wilderness areas. I insisted that was impossible. We'd all come through. We'd have had to fill out some day pass forms, or at least sign a trail log. We have no record of Joel Thatcher or Clara Ross, they repeated, their expression skeptical yet concerned. I stayed in the hospital for a few days. I was delirious, in pain, heavily medicated. Each time I asked about going back to search the woods, the doctors told me I needed rest. I demanded they look for Ruckus, my dog, but no one seemed to take me seriously. It was as if everything about that trip had been erased. They even brought me my phone, which was still dead, refusing to charge. The final day, a detective came by to ask more questions, clearly dubious of my claims. He gently suggested maybe I'd gone out alone, had some sort of accident or breakdown. The more I insisted it was real, the more pitying his expression grew. I was released a week later, bandages around my arm and shoulder, my face hollow from lack of sleep. I had no ride, so I took a bus to the next major town, still dazed. I kept an eye out for Ruckus everywhere I went, though realistically I knew he'd never wander that far alone. Sometimes, in my nightmares, I see him fighting Joel, and I hate myself for not being able to save him. In the weeks that followed, I tried to contact every possible record of Joel and Clara. I found fleeting mentions of Joel's social media from college, but no new activity. Clara's name turned up no relevant results. It was as if they'd been erased from the grid. I visited the park office where we'd presumably registered. They found a single entry for a Caleb Morris on the sign-in ledger, but no mention of anyone else. The staff insisted I must have come alone. I returned to my apartment, haunted and hollow. I wrote up everything as best I could, down to the detail of that final confrontation with the birch witch. My watch, I noticed, had stopped moving altogether, permanently fixed at 12:09 a.m., the second hand jammed in place. On a whim, I cracked it open. The gear mechanism inside was clogged with tiny black beetles, all dead. Sometimes I dream of the forest, see the pale face of bark and black sap. I hear my mother's voice calling me. Sometimes I see Ruckus running, leading me toward a clearing, only to vanish before I catch up. Or I hear Joel's mad laughter echoing between the trees. Other times, it's Clara, pinned upside down, eyes open, mouth twisted into a silent scream. I always wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I've gone back to the Huron Mountains only once since then, out of desperation for answers. I took a local guide with me, someone who knew the area well. We never found that clearing. We never found any sign of torn tents, no rotting supplies, no blood on the ground, no evidence of a tree that had once held a body suspended in the branches. But I felt the presence of something. The forest was too quiet. The wind hissed in a language I almost understood. We retreated before night fell. I had no desire to die up there. And so here I am, writing this down, hoping that in some way it exorcises the nightmares. I keep thinking, maybe I did break in the wilderness. Maybe Joel and Clara never existed. But that's a lie. I remember the way Joel used to toss me cheap beer in our dorm. I remember the way Clara looked at me with concern when Joel started acting strange. I remember Ruckus, the weight of him against my leg when he was a puppy. They existed. They were there. And now they're gone. Even now, small oddities persist in my daily life. I'll be at home and my clock will jump backward 1 minute. I'll catch glimpses of shapes in the corners of mirrors. Last night, I woke up to footsteps in my living room, but the door was still locked. This morning, I swear I smelled decaying leaves in the hallway. My wounds are mostly healed, but I still have a line of scars on my forearm that look like the pattern of birch bark. When I rub them, they sometimes feel soft. Everyone wants a neat ending to a horror story. The monster is destroyed, the hero escapes triumphant, or else the curse claims its victim, final and absolute. But in my case, the monster dissolved into insects and I walked away. The problem is, I'm not so sure it's over. I'm not so sure the forest has let me go. The sense of dread sits in my chest day after day. I can't prove any of this happened, not really. All I know is I can't sleep for more than a few hours at a time, and the nightmares keep telling me the birch witch is still out there. Possibly inside me, inside the rotting wood in my mind, waiting for me to let my guard down. I can't imagine returning to the Huron Mountains now, but some nights I hear a strange call, a whisper on the breeze outside my window. Sometimes it sounds like ruckus, whining. Sometimes like my mother repeating my name in that same soft hush. And I'm terrified that one day I might answer, might give in to that pull. Because once you hear her voice, it's like a hook in your spirit, tugging you deeper and deeper until the leaves close over your head and you become just another story of someone who went missing in the woods and never came out. They call me paranoid. They say I should try therapy. Maybe I should. Maybe a professional will help me accept that the forest was just a forest, that the rotting stench and the black sap and the half-alive demon clad in birch bark were delusions of a stressed mind. But I know what I saw, and I know that I came back alone. Maybe the best I can do is warn others. If you ever hear a voice in the woods calling your name, and your dog won't stop growling at the darkness, trust the dog, turn around, leave. If you don't, you might never find your way out again. This happened in October of 2022. I'm Caleb Morris, 34 years old, missing 2 close friends and my loyal German Shepherd. And even though I limped out of that forest with my life, I'll never truly be free of what lurks behind those birch trees. If you don't believe me, just check your watch sometime. If it shows 12:09 a.m. and you hear someone whisper your name in a loved one's voice, don't listen, don't look, and for God's sake, don't follow it into the darkness, because something waits there, something old, hungry, and patient. And once it knows your name, it never forgets. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 34 years old. This happened in late October 2022, when the air was cold enough to bite my cheeks in the morning and the sun set too quickly over the Porcupine Mountains in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. If you're reading this, I hope it serves as both a warning and a testament, because I'm not sure who I was by the time it all ended, or if I'm still me now. I had come to Lake of the Clouds in the Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park to find some clarity. I needed solitude after a rough breakup. I'd spent the past few months feeling unmoored, drifting between my job as a freelance graphic designer and endless nights of insomnia. I convinced myself a solo hiking trip in a place with minimal cell service would give me space to breathe, to be alone with my thoughts. And in some defiant move, I decided I wasn't truly alone. I had my 6-year-old German Shepherd, Boone. He was my protector, my companion. He'd been on a few weekend hikes before, and although he'd never been in anything quite so remote, I believed he could handle it. I drove up from Illinois over the course of a day. The roads grew emptier the farther north I went, turning from wide interstates to quiet highways lined with pines. By the time I reached the park's boundaries, the sky was a dim gray, early twilight falling over the mountains in the distance. My phone still had a sliver of battery left, some miracle considering I'd forgotten my car charger at home, but I decided to switch the phone off to save juice. Something in my gut warned me I'd need that battery later. The sense of needing a lifeline, perhaps. I found the tiny half-hidden parking lot near the Lake of the Clouds overlook. There were only 2 other vehicles, a dusty maroon SUV and a battered green truck that had clearly seen better days. With a final pat on my pocket for reassurance, phone, wallet, keys, I stepped out into the chilly air. Boone hopped down behind me, his nails clicking on the asphalt. It was eerily quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the hush of forest on all sides. I breathed in, letting the silence swallow me. It felt strangely ominous, though it was what I'd come for, right? Solitude. The plan was to hike in several miles, make camp near a marked site I'd read about, do some exploring around Lake of the Clouds, and then circle back after a few nights. At the time, I convinced myself it would be a gentle reintroduction to serious hiking. But in my pre-trip research, I'd also read local stories. Things about sudden fogs rolling in, sightings of shapes or lights in the trees, people losing hours in the mountains. Typical campfire tales, I told myself, meant to spook city folk. I'd always found them intriguing, but not exactly realistic. That was before everything changed. We set off as dusk settled in, Boone trotting comfortably by my side, tongue lolling. Our first night's camp was only a few miles in. I carried a topographic map and a handheld GPS device. According to my plan, it should have taken us an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at a slow pace, to reach a small clearing with a designated backcountry site. But as we walked, I noticed something off. The path seemed unfamiliar, even though I'd pored over every detail of the trail on that map. I put it down to my nerves. Or maybe the onset of darkness. We kept moving, and the forest pressed in around us, a wall of black shapes crowding our periphery. About 45 minutes into the hike, my GPS beeped, then blinked out. I groaned, tapped it, thinking the batteries must have died, but I'd placed fresh ones in that morning. The device flickered on and off, the screen flashing random symbols, then it died completely. Great, I thought. Technology was failing me already. Then Boone let out a low whine. He stopped in the middle of the trail, his ears trained forward. "What is it, boy?" I asked, my voice echoing. I didn't hear anything out of place, just my own heartbeat throbbing in my ears. Boone lowered his head but didn't move. I had to tug gently on his collar to get him walking again. The further we went, the more tense he seemed, as if every breath of wind carried something rancid only he could smell. Eventually, we found the designated campsite. It was just a small clearing beneath tall pines, which let in faint moonlight. Relieved, I dropped my pack and shook off the growing sense of dread that had been clinging to me. Boone paced around, sniffing the ground in circles as if he was searching for something. I forced a laugh, trying to lighten my own mood. It was cold enough that I needed to start a fire. I gathered kindling, snapped twigs, and crumpled some paper I'd brought. The flames caught quickly, too quickly actually, and they burned with an odd, almost bluish tinge around the edges. Chalk that up to minerals in the wood, I told myself, or maybe my imagination. Then the flames died out. Within seconds, the fire that had seemed so ready to roar simply went out with barely any smoke. I cursed, tried again. Second time around it stayed lit, but flickered a pale green for a moment, which turned my stomach. I'd never seen a campfire do that. Boone sat a few feet away, watching me quietly. Usually he'd lay near the fire and soak up the warmth, or at least relax. Now he looked on edge, ears pinned back. "You okay?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. He didn't budge. He just stared past me into the darkness. Despite my apprehension, I told myself that it was the first night jitters. After all, the Porcupine Mountains in October were legendary for their sudden changes in weather and swirling mists. The stories I'd heard about unusual phenomena could be explained by weird atmospheric conditions, I was sure. I ate a quick meal of instant noodles, offered Boone some kibble. He sniffed it, licked it once, then turned away. That was peculiar. He almost never skipped a meal. I sighed and put the food away. The air felt thicker now, and when I checked my watch, it said 11:15 p.m. That felt too late, considering we'd only been hiking around 2 hours or so. Then again, maybe the long drive had worn me down. Exhausted, I climbed into my sleeping bag inside the small, one-person tent. Boone settled near the entrance flap, as if standing guard. I gave him a reassuring pat. We dozed off. I remember stirring at some point in the night to the sound of rustling, something like footsteps just outside the tent. My mind drifted in that half-sleep confusion, and I thought, probably an animal. Boone let out a low, rumbling growl, which he rarely did. It set my heart pounding. By the time I fully woke and sat up, the noise was gone. When morning came, I emerged from the tent to a dreary, gray light. It was a dim, cold dawn. I checked my phone's clock, pressing the power button. Nothing. The battery was dead. Strange, because I'd turned it off intentionally to save power. More annoyingly, Boone was nowhere in sight. His leash sat coiled beside the tent entrance, but he wasn't on it. Panic stabbed through me. "Boone!" I shouted, voice echoing among pines. "Boone, come here." For a moment, I heard a faint bark. I grabbed a flashlight and started searching the perimeter. The trees were dense, and the ground was carpeted in leaf litter. After several minutes of calling, I found him behind a towering birch. He was standing there, just staring. When I approached, I noticed his hackles raised. His eyes looked a bit glazed, as though he'd been out there for hours and a days. "Hey, boy," I whispered gently, hooking his collar. "You scared me." He glanced at me, then turned his gaze back into the forest. I didn't see anything. No signs of other hikers or an animal. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. In that moment, the forest felt entirely unnatural, too still, too charged with tension. I led Boone back to camp and was greeted by an immediate sense of wrongness. My pack, which I'd left sealed, was unzipped and half-tipped over as though rifled through. The bag of dog food had been torn open. The strangest part was my sleeping bag. I'd left it inside the tent, zipped up. Now it lay outside, unzipped from the inside, as if I or someone else had crawled out and left it there. But it was soaked, as if dipped in water, muddy handprints staining the fabric. My breath caught in my throat. Could an animal have done that? But the prints on the sleeping bag were too large for a raccoon or a fox. They looked almost human, but with splayed, crooked fingers. I wanted to blame everything on some messed-up raccoon phenomenon, but the shapes of those prints were all wrong. The campsite was littered with bizarre footprints, half smeared in the mud. I felt the primal instinct to flee. Instead, I grabbed the map from my pack, hoping I could still salvage the trip by heading toward Lake of the Clouds, where there might be more people. My phone was useless now, so I pinned my hopes on the paper map. But as I spread it open on a dry rock, I found the ink had run in places, as if water or condensation had pooled inside the folds. Much of the print was blurred. My route was still somewhat visible, but the topography lines were faint. It would be enough to get me going in the right direction, provided I could find the actual trail. I tried my best to calm my trembling hands, told myself that I'd just head out quickly, get to a main path and go to the visitor center. Hike over. I forced a couple bites of granola into my mouth, gave Boone some water. He still wouldn't eat. His eyes never left the tree line. I broke camp as fast as I could, adrenaline spiking every time I heard a twig snap. By mid-morning, we set off. We'd been hiking for about 30 minutes when I heard footsteps behind me. Hard to describe how I noticed them, but it was the crunch of leaves that matched mine too closely. I halted. They halted. Heart hammering, I turned around. The forest was empty. I took a step forward. From behind a tree, a figure emerged. I gasped, nearly falling back, "Whoa, sorry. Didn't mean to scare you," the figure said, raising his arms. He was a man in his late 30s, wearing a dark blue windbreaker and a well-worn backpack. His face was a bit gaunt, and his hair was a mess of curls. He had a scruffy beard and an apologetic smile. "I'm Nathan Pike. You are?" I took a moment to steady myself. Sarah Whitmore, my dog is Boone." Nathan looked at Boone, who was bristling. "He doesn't seem too happy to see me." I offered a shaky grin. "He's not acting like himself lately. Sorry about that." "All good," Nathan said, stepping a bit closer. "Listen, I'm trying to find the next campsite. I might have gone off trail. GPS died on me, if you can believe it. And my phone is worthless, no signal. Plus, the battery's draining out here like crazy." I let out a relieved laugh. Mine too. Must be something about the mountains. We were heading toward Lake of the Clouds, actually. Maybe we can go together, if you don't mind. Nathan shrugged. "Yeah, definitely. Safety in numbers." That was how Nathan Pike entered my life. We walked together, making polite small talk. He said he'd been out here a couple of days already, that the nights got weirdly foggy, and that time sometimes felt slippery, though he laughed it off. We parted ways briefly at a fork in the trail, where he insisted on checking a side path for firewood. Apparently, there was a small patch of pines good for kindling. He never came back. I waited about 10 minutes, called out his name, no answer. Boone paced restlessly, pawing the ground. Finally, I decided to move on alone, telling myself maybe we'd run into each other later. It was better to keep going than stand around a deserted fork. The sky was starting to darken again, the day passing more quickly than I expected. It felt like I trekked for hours, but my watch insisted it was only around noon. The forest canopy thickened, forming a near-constant twilight overhead. The wind picked up, sending swirling leaves around my boots. At one point, we reached a small lookout that gave me a partial view of Lake of the Clouds in the distance, a slate-blue expanse framed by blazing autumn colors. Yet, something about the sight unsettled me. It looked farther away than it should, given how much ground we'd covered. According to the broken lines on my map, we should have been close. Instead, the lake seemed to recede each time I advanced. At some point, I noticed I was starving. Boone was panting, exhausted. I picked a spot to rest and rummaged through my pack for the trail mix I'd stuffed at the bottom. The entire bag was filled with a greenish fuzz, mold, rotting it overnight. I gagged and threw it aside. Nearly everything else was spoiled or damp. My water bottle had a foul odor, so I dumped the water, then refilled it from a small stream. Usually, I'd purify it, but I needed to rinse the smell away at least. Boone seemed as horrified as a dog could be. My dog food supply was also damp, nearly putrid. Frustration and fear threatened to overwhelm me. "This is impossible," I muttered, shivering. Everything was sealed. That was when I heard a voice calling, faint but unmistakable. "Sarah! Hey, Sarah!" It was Nathan's voice. I scrambled up, relief flooding my chest. Boone lifted his head warily. We followed the sound deeper into the woods, calling back. In a small clearing, Nathan stood by a battered stump, his arms limp at his sides. He stared straight at me with wide eyes. I rushed closer, words tumbling out. "Oh my God, are you okay? I waited for you. Did you get lost?" He blinked slowly, as if measuring his next move. Then he gave me a too-wide grin, something that tugged unnaturally at his cheeks. "Yeah, I guess I just lost track of time," he said, voice oddly monotone. My chest twisted with a sense of wrongness. "We can walk together now," I offered. "I'm worried about the weather changing again, or the sun setting too soon. We should probably find a stable campsite." Nathan nodded. His eyes flicked down to Boone, who growled low in his throat. "Your dog hates me," he said flatly, no inflection. "He's just been on edge since we got here," I said apologetically, though I didn't like the way Nathan's focus seemed so intense. "Hey, let's keep going." He didn't protest. We navigated the winding path for what felt like hours, but every attempt to find the marked trail on the map led us to dead ends or loops that curved back to old footprints. At one point, we passed the same half-rotten log I swore I'd seen earlier that morning. My sense of direction became unreliable. Time felt jumbled. My watch read 2:52 p.m., but the sky was nearly as dark as dusk. Nathan walked behind me, occasionally humming a strange tune under his breath. An atonal, stuttering melody that made my scalp prickle. Once, I thought I heard my own name in that hum. I tried to chalk it up to nerves. We made camp before full dark fell. This time, I insisted on clearing the area properly. I lit a small fire, hoping it might keep away the unnatural dread. But again, the flames shimmered a weird greenish hue, brightening Nathan's features in an eerie glow. He stared into the fire with a vacant expression. Then he made some offhand comment about how the tree limbs overhead looked like giant bones. We didn't talk much afterward. Boone circled the clearing, sniffing and whining. Finally, he curled up at my side, trembling. I offered him water. He refused it. That night, the fog rolled in. It was so thick I couldn't see past the halo of our small fire. Nathan sat cross-legged on the other side, humming that tune. The smoke from our campfire swirled in strange patterns. My eyes grew heavy, though a twinge of primal fear told me not to fall asleep. I fought to stay awake, chewing on my lip until I tasted blood. I heard a voice through the swirling mist. It was faint, but it was unmistakably the voice of my ex-boyfriend, Michael. Sarah. He had left me a mere 3 months ago, said he found someone who wasn't so broken. That memory felt like a knife in my gut. My heart hammered. My rational mind knew it couldn't be him. He was hundreds of miles away, probably enjoying his new life. But the voice came again, insistent, from the dark. "Sarah, come here, please." I stood. My legs shook. Nathan watched me, that grin on his face stretching further. He said nothing, but his eyes never left me. Boone barked once, sharply, then took off into the fog. I yelled after him, grabbed my flashlight, but he was gone. I chased for maybe 10 steps before I realized I could no longer see the firelight behind me. The fog was a wall of pale gray. My foot got caught in a root or a vine, and I tumbled forward, scraping my palms on rocks. The ground felt wrong, spongy beneath me, and when I got back to my feet, I somehow ended up near the remains of a campfire that wasn't mine. Embers glowed faintly, as if somebody had been there not long ago. I pivoted, shining my flashlight everywhere. "Boone," I called, voice echoing. No reply. My watch said 1:18 a.m., but I couldn't trust it anymore. "Sarah?" A voice came from behind me. I spun around. Nathan stepped out of the fog, or at least it looked like Nathan. He wore the same windbreaker, same tangled curls, but the silhouette was slightly off, like the arms were too long or the shoulders slumped at a strange angle. I stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in my hands. "Where is my dog?" I demanded. He just stared. Then his mouth spread in a grin that was far too wide. He took a step toward me. I bolted. I sprinted blindly into the fog, heart racing, tears threatening to spill. I couldn't see more than a foot in front of me. My mind reeled. A branch smacked my face, drawing a stinging cut across my cheek. I almost dropped the flashlight. I heard footsteps behind me, but they didn't sound like running, more like a scraping shuffle. That terrified me more. Somehow, the forest parted, and I burst through a line of trees into a clearing. Just as abruptly, I was at my old campsite from the previous night. The remains of a burned-out fire ring sat there, and the ground was strewn with footprints, mine, presumably, plus others. I sank to my knees in confusion. How did I end up here again? Then I heard Boone whimper. I scrambled to the edge of the clearing, shining my flashlight behind the trunk of a giant pine. He lay there, panting heavily, eyes half-lidded as if drugged. "Oh, God," I gasped, dropping to cradle his head. "Hey, buddy, wake up." He blinked slowly, recognized me, and let out a soft whine. Relief pulsed through me. At least he was alive. Snap. A twig behind me. I whipped around, heart in my throat. The figure in the windbreaker, Nathan, stood a few yards away. This time, something about his face was different. His skin appeared sagging, like it wasn't attached to the bone properly. And although his eyes glinted in the beam of my flashlight, they weren't quite aligned, one slightly lower than the other. "Nathan!" My voice shook. He hissed. It was a sound no human throat should make. Then, in a split second, he lunged. Boone barked, a fierce protective snarl, but he was too weak to rise. I scrambled back, searching for anything to defend myself. My hands closed around a long, thick branch. I swung it wildly, catching Nathan across the shoulder. He let out that hissing shriek, stumbled back. I took the chance to haul Boone to his feet. He managed to stand, leaning against me. We staggered away from the clearing, my flashlight bobbing. I heard that scraping shuffle behind me, then silence. We walked in circles the rest of the night, or so it felt. The fog gradually lifted, thinning out with the first glimmers of dawn. Eventually, I recognized a vantage point that I'd glimpsed before, the partial view of Lake of the Clouds. Now, the lake looked strangely closer. I forced myself forward, ignoring my trembling legs. At some point, I blacked out. When I came to, I was lying on damp leaves, the sky a dull gray overhead. My watch read 10:04 a.m., but that meant nothing to me anymore. Boone was gone again. Frantically, I called for him, but no response. My head pounded. The memory of the night felt half-formed, like a nightmare. Where had Nathan gone? I recalled the unnatural shape of his face, that hissing shriek. My heart pounded at the memory. I didn't see Boone anywhere, so I forced myself onward, convinced that I'd find other hikers or a ranger station near Lake of the Clouds. The forest smelled musty, almost rotten. It wasn't just wet leaves. There was a charnel house odor beneath everything, making me gag. Time slipped again. I have no idea how long I wandered. The map was useless now, and every path seemed to loop back on itself. A swirl of panic made me want to scream at the trees. I started noticing bizarre signs. A single hiking boot jammed between branches. An abandoned campsite with rotting gear, a half-decomposed squirrel with its eyes gouged out. Then I heard footsteps. A mix of relief and terror washed over me. Maybe it was another living soul, but maybe it was that thing again. I crouched behind a thick trunk. "Sarah?" A familiar voice. Nathan. But it sounded more normal now, less stilted. Against my better judgment, I peeked around the trunk. He stood about 15 yards away, hands outstretched, an anxious expression etched into his face. He looked more like the original Nathan I'd met earlier, a bit gaunt, sure, but entirely human. "Stay back," I yelled. "What are you?" He looked startled. "What do you mean? What am I?" "It's me, Nathan. I got lost. I don't remember last night. I think I blacked out. I woke up near some stream. I heard you calling your dog." He stepped closer, palms raised. "I swear to God, I'm not a threat." Part of me wanted to believe him. He didn't move like that thing from last night. He moved like a human, trembling and unsteady. His eyes seemed aligned again. I lowered my branch, though my heart still hammered. How do I know you're real? I asked, voice shaking. He swallowed hard. I don't know. Ask me something. Something that last night's thing wouldn't know. We met yesterday. I told you my phone was dead, and we were both heading to Lake of the Clouds. I lost you when I went to find firewood. Remember? A wave of confusion washed over me. That was what originally happened. The monster had never told me that story. It hadn't even pretended to be normal Nathan. So maybe this was the real Nathan. Could they both exist? Did I see him die or vanish? I shook my head, almost dizzy. I'm sorry, I whispered. This place is messing with me. I saw something wearing your face last night. It killed Boone. A sob cut me off. The memory came rushing back. The snapping of Boone's neck? Or had that been a nightmare? I looked around, frantic. I can't find him. Boone, I can't find him. He was so weak, I think I might have lost him for good. Nathan took a step toward me, sincerity in his eyes. Look, let's find him. If we stick together, we'll get out. We can find help. I nodded, too drained to protest. We set off again, scanning the area, shouting for Boone. Several times we ran into dead ends, literally, paths that ended in tangles of brambles and fallen logs. The day was cold and clammy, a perpetual twilight that hardly felt like daylight. Sometime later, maybe an hour, maybe 3, we stumbled upon fresh footprints that must have been ours. We were going in circles. My mind felt near collapse. Nathan tried to keep morale up, but his voice trembled every time he spoke. The environment was oppressive, the hush of the forest too absolute. Then, faintly, I heard a whimper. I froze. "Boone?" I shouted. Another whimper. We followed the sound, pushing through a line of thick pines. Finally, we came to a small clearing, and there he was, my dog, lying on his side, breathing shallowly. I rushed over, tears burning my eyes. "Boone!" He lifted his head a fraction, recognized me, but he didn't get up. A black crusted stain on the fur of his neck suggested some wound. My throat tightened. He looked in pain, but there was no immediate sign of a mortal injury, not like a broken neck or anything. Maybe I had only dreamed that horrific snap. Nathan hovered beside me. We should carry him. I bet there's a ranger station or a side road near Lake of the Clouds. If we can just get there. I nodded, tears dripping onto Boone's fur. Gently, we lifted him, sharing the weight. Each step was agony. He was a heavy dog, and we had no stretcher, just our arms. We stumbled across broken branches and uneven ground. My muscles burned. The forest grew denser with every attempt to find a route west, or was it north? The map's print was smeared, and the compass on Nathan's watch kept spinning. Time dragged. I couldn't say how long we struggled through that wilderness. Occasionally, I'd glimpse a shape in the trees behind us, tall, vaguely humanoid, just at the edge of my vision. Every time I turned to look, it vanished. My stomach twisted in knots. Nathan clenched his jaw whenever I asked if he saw anything. No, he'd say, but he didn't sound convinced. Then it happened. One moment we were forging ahead, half limping, and the next it was almost nightfall. The sky turned black. Nathan and I exchanged a bewildered look. "It can't be," he whispered. "It felt like we only walked for an hour or 2. Panic roiled in my stomach. "We need to set camp," I said. "We can't keep walking in the dark. It's impossible." Nathan hesitated, but he was clearly exhausted too. Reluctantly, we gathered in a small clearing that offered at least some visibility of the sky. Building a fire was a nightmare with our shaky arms. At last, the tinder caught. The flame flickered, blue, then normal. We inhaled in unison, watching it in uneasy silence. Boone lay near the fire, head on my lap. I stroked his fur. He was cold, shivering. I wrapped him in my spare sweater. Nathan rummaged through his pack and produced a small, half-eaten protein bar. We split it. Even that meager meal was enough to ease my dizziness slightly. "How did you get out here alone?" I asked him. He gave a half laugh. "Sort of the same reason as you, I guess. Needed solitude. My fiancée and I split a month ago. I was looking for some clarity, but I should have chosen a less remote place, right?" I managed a weak smile. "Same. Big mistake." Nathan nodded, eyes distant. God, what if we don't get out? This place, it's not right." We both fell silent. The fire popped. Boone let out a soft whine. I was about to check his wound again when movement at the edge of the clearing made me jerk upright. Someone stood in the shadows watching us, or something. The shape was tall, skeletal. Then it stepped into the weak glow of the fire. My stomach lurched violently. It looked like Nathan. Same face, but the skin was too pale, too tight, as though stretched over a skull. The eyes were sunken. The mouth parted in that too wide grin. Nathan scrambled back, choking on his breath. "What the—" The figure stepped closer, moving with a jerky motion. Every step made a crackling sound, as though its joints were stiff. A thick mist clung to its shoulders, swirling. Its mouth opened, and I braced myself for that hissing shriek. Instead, it spoke in a voice that mirrored my ex-boyfriend's, calm and resonant. "Sarah, come here." I felt my mind tear, my greatest heartbreak repeated in this monstrous shape. I couldn't look away. Nathan swore under his breath. "Sarah, we need to run." But the creature lunged. In a single bound, it crossed the clearing, slammed into Nathan, sending him sprawling into the fire. Sparks flew. I screamed as he frantically rolled, patting out the embers that clung to his jacket. The thing loomed over me, eyes glassy. Up close, I could see it trembling beneath the skin, as if something inside was trying to break through. I reached for the first solid object I could find, an unlit branch from our tinder pile, still thick as a club. With adrenaline-fueled terror, I swung it at the creature's face. The blow landed with a sickening crack. The skin tore, revealing raw flesh and something black, tar-like beneath. The creature reeled back, letting out that piercing hiss. Nathan recovered enough to lunge at it, brandishing a hunting knife. He stabbed it in the side. Thick black liquid oozed out. The creature flailed, spitting in multiple voices at once. Then, to my horror, it turned on Boone, who was lying helpless on the ground. In a single vicious movement, it kicked him. My heart nearly stopped at the whimper that tore from Boone's throat. I lost myself to fury. I raised the branch and slammed it into the creature's back. The wood splintered, but it distracted the thing from finishing off my dog. It turned on me, features contorted with rage. For a moment, I thought it would tear me apart, but Nathan tackled it from behind. They fell into the darkness beyond the firelight, tumbling over logs. I scrambled after them. What I saw next still haunts me. The shape that looked like Nathan pinned beneath the real Nathan, while its face twisted and reformed, flickering. It fought with inhuman strength. The real Nathan jammed the knife deeper, causing thick black fluid to pour out. The creature's mouth opened, and a high-pitched droning noise erupted, making my ears ring. Nathan cried out. Sobbing, I grabbed a large rock and slammed it against the creature's skull, once, twice. On the third blow, it caved in with a sickening crunch. Black fluid sprayed. The droning noise died in a bubbling choke. Nathan rolled off, gasping. I stumbled back to Boone, who had somehow found the strength to stand, trembling but upright. Blood trickled from his muzzle. "It's okay, boy, it's okay," I whispered, tears streaming. Nathan limped into the firelight. His eyes shone with shock and horror. "Is it dead?" he asked. I could barely speak. "I think so." We both stared at the unmoving body just beyond the glow. The shape was still for a moment, and then, to my utter terror, it twitched. I grabbed a burning brand from the fire, ignoring the heat on my hand. "We have to burn it," I said, voice quavering. Nathan nodded, face pale. Together, we dragged the twitching corpse into the center of the clearing. The stench was overwhelming. I thrust the burning brand onto its chest, where the black fluid oozed. The flames caught quickly, almost hungrily, devouring that strange flesh. We staggered back, choking on the foul, oily smoke. Within minutes, the thing was consumed, writhing silently in the flames. The skin peeled away, revealing something skeletal and warped. The fog around the clearing eddied, as if recoiling from the fire's heat. Eventually, nothing but blackened bones remained, sizzling in the embers. We collapsed on the ground, dizzy with shock. Boone lay at my side, breathing shallowly. I kept a hand on him, as if anchoring myself to reality. The entire world felt unsteady. Nathan stared at the flames, mouth pressed into a grim line. "Is that what's been haunting this place?" he finally whispered. "Because I think it might not be alone." A wave of nausea hit me. The forest around us felt massive and dark, filled with hidden eyes. I half expected more shapes to come pouring from the trees, but none did. The fog remained, swirling just beyond the perimeter. We couldn't sleep. We sat there, keeping the fire stoked, listening for any sound. By the time the sky lightened, still that dull, cheerless gray, Boone had stopped trembling. His eyes were alert again, and he lapped a little water from my palm. Relief flooded me that he was still alive, that the creature's kick hadn't broken him. He was injured, but not lost. Nathan and I were hollow-eyed, filthy with soot and dried blood, and that black fluid. I saw him stare at his own shaking hands more than once. I tried to express some sort of comfort, but the words wouldn't come. At dawn's faint glow, we left the clearing. We carried Boone between us for a while, until he insisted on hobbling along on 3 legs, leaning on me. We had to find a way out. If that monster was one of many, I refused to dwell on the possibility. Time warped again. Or maybe we just lost track in our exhaustion. My watch read 7:45 a.m. for hours, the second hand ticking aimlessly. We made slow progress, the undergrowth tearing at our clothes, the old map worthless in my trembling hands. At one point, we found a half-dry stream that we followed for what felt like an eternity, hoping it led to a main trail or a road. Suddenly, Nathan stopped in his tracks. "Do you smell that?" he asked quietly. I sniffed the air, smoke. Real wood smoke, not the oily stench from the night before. I felt an electric thrill of hope. We hurried in that direction, pushing past a thick stand of evergreens. Finally, we saw a wooden structure, a ranger's cabin or an outpost, perched near the base of a slope. We practically sobbed with relief, stumbling toward it. Boone let out a bark, his first sign of real energy. The cabin door was shut, and smoke curled from a chimney. I banged on the door. "Hello? Anyone here? We need help." No answer. I tried the handle, it swung open. A wave of musty warmth hit us. The inside was dim, lit only by embers in a small stove. Stacks of old ranger logs and maps lay scattered on a table. Cobwebs draped across the rafters. No sign of any occupant. "Could they be out on patrol?" Nathan asked, dropping his pack. "Maybe. Let's just—" I hesitated, but I saw no better option. "Let's warm up and wait. Maybe there's a radio." We found an old shortwave radio set, but the electricity or battery was dead. No response. We rummaged around, discovered a pair of tattered blankets, some half-empty cans of beans. Nathan heated the beans on the stove while I tended to Boone's wounds with a rag and some water. The entire time my nerves were on high alert, certain that the gray thing or some other horror would burst in at any moment. But no one came. Time drifted again, but at least we were indoors. Eventually, I dozed off in a chair, my head resting on my arms. I had a series of nightmares, images of Michael's voice calling from the trees, Boone lying dead, the monster wearing Nathan's face. I jerked awake, covered in cold sweat. Nathan, across the room, also woke with a start, knife gripped in his hand. Outside, the sky was still gray. We had no idea if it was morning or afternoon, or perhaps it had been a single hour's rest. Everything felt indefinite. We'd just decided to risk forging on, hopefully finding a road, when I heard footsteps on the porch. Nathan and I exchanged wide-eyed looks. We positioned ourselves behind the door, hearts pounding, knives drawn. Creak. The door opened. A park ranger wearing a green jacket stepped in, humming softly to himself. His eyes widened when he saw us. He nearly dropped a handful of kindling. "Jesus Christ, you scared me. Who the hell are you two?" Relief, pure and overwhelming. I almost cried. Sarah Whitmore, this is Nathan Pike. We got lost. We've been out here for days, maybe. Something attacked us." The ranger stared, taking in our torn clothes, the blood, Boone's injuries. "Days? Attacked? God, did you see a bear or something?" Nathan shook his head frantically. "Not a bear, something else. Where is everyone? We haven't come across other hikers." The ranger rubbed his forehead. "There haven't been many folks out here lately. End of the season. Listen, we need to get you folks out. I've got a jeep on the old service road a mile that way. We can get you to a hospital." Nathan and I exchanged a trembling nod. The ranger turned to gather some supplies, rummaging in a closet, oblivious to how our hearts still pounded. Boone let out a soft bark of relief. I ran my hand over his ears, murmuring that everything would be okay. But then the ranger's voice changed. "I'll just have to drain some time from you first." All the blood in my body turned to ice. I lifted my gaze to see him standing at the closet, twisted sideways. His voice came out in that same multitonal hum. When he turned to face us, the skin of his face stretched painfully, revealing dark shapes beneath. His eyes flickered, sliding out of alignment. Nathan screamed, stumbling backward. I lunged for the stove, snatching a metal poker from the coals. The ranger thing rushed us with inhuman speed, arms flailing. He slammed me into the wall, knocking the poker from my hand. My vision blurred. Nathan tackled him, knife flashing. The creature shrieked as black fluid spurted from the wound. It reared back and slammed Nathan against the table. "I need to feed," it rasped in multiple voices. Michael's, Nathan's, my own. "I can't let you go." White-hot rage seared through me. I grabbed the poker again, ignoring the pain of hot metal against my palm. I jabbed it into the monster's side, twisting. It howled, thrashing so wildly that the table overturned. Boone barked, half limping, trying to defend us. With a desperate shove, we forced the creature back into the stove's corner. I held the poker there, letting the embers scorch its flesh. The stench was indescribable. The monster jerked, a grotesque puppet with broken strings. In that moment, I saw its features flicker between the ranger's face and something featureless, blank. Nathan, fueled by adrenaline, plunged his knife repeatedly, tears streaming down his face. The creature convulsed. Then it collapsed. We watched its body transform into a half-burned husk that dissolved into black sludge. For a moment, we were too shocked to move. Then we heard a dragging sound. That sludge was creeping across the cabin floor toward the shadows, as though trying to escape. Without hesitation, we grabbed the ranger's leftover kindling, tossed it on the sludge, and used more embers from the stove to ignite it. A ghastly odor filled the cabin. The black slime bubbled, sizzled, then dried up, leaving no shape behind. Nathan and I slumped, panting, covered in soot. Boone whined, nudged my leg. I sank down next to him, burying my face in his fur, ignoring the tears that refused to stop. We didn't talk as we left the cabin. We found the service road behind it, a narrow, overgrown track. It was a tough mile for Boone, but we couldn't stay in that cursed building. Eventually, by some miracle, we stumbled onto a small clearing with a battered green Jeep. The keys were in the ignition, as if the ranger had left them. We loaded Boone in the back. Nathan got behind the wheel. The engine coughed but started. My heart hammered. We drove that uneven track, bumping over roots and rocks, the forest pressing in on both sides. For the first few minutes, every shift of the shadows made me flinch, expecting the gray thing to leap at us again, but it never came. Gradually, the road widened and the pines thinned. At last, we emerged onto a paved road. A battered sign read M107. I almost laughed in delirious relief. Civilization. We drove in the direction that seemed to lead out of the park. I clutched Boone's collar, whispering reassurances. Time returned in a rush. I saw a sign for a ranger station. This one, presumably manned by a living, breathing human. We pulled in, stumbling out. The people inside erupted in alarm at our ragged condition. A flurry of radio calls, a quick load into an ambulance, and everything blurred into an exhausting hospital visit. They kept me for 2 nights at the hospital in Wakefield. Nathan was in a separate ward, recovering from a concussion. Boone, after a trip to a local vet, made it through with some stitches and pain medication. He had a fractured rib but was expected to recover. The doctors asked 1,000 questions. I told them we'd gotten lost, that we were attacked by an animal, maybe a rabid wolf. They seemed skeptical about some details, but they accepted that I was severely dehydrated and traumatized. The local police took statements. They said they'd send a search party to investigate the area. I doubt they found anything. A few days later, I was cleared to leave. Nathan left around the same time, refusing to talk to the press. He and I exchanged numbers, though neither of us quite had the words for what we'd gone through. We parted with a somber hug, the enormity of the horror unspoken. I headed home. I still wake up at night sometimes, hearing that droning hiss or seeing the gray thing's face flicker through my mind. My phone was dead and useless, so I replaced it. I can't bring myself to look at pictures of me and Michael, or to even hear his voice. It's become a trigger for me. He texted me once or twice since then, purely about mundane things, but I can't bring myself to reply. A week after I got back, I found a note on my doorstep. No postage, no return address. It was just a piece of paper with shaky handwriting and black marker. Run when it stares back. I didn't sleep that night. I can't shake the feeling that something followed me home. Most nights, Boone sleeps at the foot of my bed, occasionally letting out a low growl in the darkness. Sometimes, I sense a presence in the corner of my room, barely visible in the flicker of passing headlights outside. My therapist says it's trauma, that I need to differentiate reality from nightmares. But if you've made it this far, let me give you a piece of advice. If you ever find yourself in the Porcupine Mountains, alone, off-trail, or even on the best-marked path, and the air suddenly goes still, and your dog starts growling at nothing, and a heavy fog rolls in, turn around and run. Because if you meet a stranger out there, or if you hear a familiar voice calling from the shadows, you'll never truly know if it's human Or, if it's that gray thing, wearing a borrowed face, craving your time, your life, I can't tell you how or why it does what it does. All I can say is that it's real, and once you see it, you'll never feel safe again. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 34 years old. This happened in late October 2022, when I thought a simple hike might mend my fractured heart. Instead, I learned what it's like to face something that twists your memories, warps your sense of time, and wears your face if it wants to. I'm not sure I escaped, because I'm not sure I'm still me.